Chapter 1264. Merge here. Qin Nan turned around with a startled expression. Huh! As soon as Qin Nan turned around, he immediately saw the 8 martial monarch tombs emitting auras as if they had been awakened. However, there were now 19 martial monarch tombs emitting auras at the same time. What was going on? Qin Nan, I forgot to mention, whenever a cultivator enters the martial monarch tombs, the martial monarchs will awaken based on the talent, strength, etc. For example, at the beginning, only 8 martial monarchs have acknowledged you, but when you triggered the disaster beast, 11 more martial monarchs have acknowledged you and awakened you. Besides, when the martial monarchs acknowledge you, they will make a deal with you and give you some benefit. The Sun and Moon Sword God explained, as if he was aware of Qin Nan's doubts. Qin Nan immediately came to a realization after hearing this. It was most likely that the talent and strength he had displayed had allowed him to obtain the piece of the Kanglan tree from the owner of the 5 mountains. It seemed like the martial monarch tombs were not as simple as a martial monarch tomb. Now that 19 martial monarchs have awakened for you, and my clone can lend you a hand. Therefore, when you're merging with the martial trees, I'll be able to lend you a hand and help you succeed. On top of that, the wretched disaster forest and the South Heaven sacred ground have always been enemies, so you don't have to worry about anything else. Besides, this martial monarch tomb is extremely mysterious, able to isolate itself from the heavenly fortune. If you trigger a terrifying rare phenomenon when you're merging with the martial trees, the South Heaven Gate and the rest of the authorities will have no clue. The Sun and Moon Sword God said calmly. He had already planned everything for Qin Nan. Haha, Qin Nan, go ahead and merge with the martial trees, I'll surely lend you a hand. Tisk Tsk, merging with 2 martial trees with Tao patterns. Senior Sun and Moon Sword God is right. At the end of the path, the Heart Demon Martial Monarch, the Heaven Destruction Martial Monarch, the Soul Tribute Martial Monarch, the Forbidden Magic Martial Monarch, the Zhou Mie Martial Monarch, and the rest of the martial monarchs expressed their opinions. To them, even though Qin Nan had yet to achieve the martial monarch realm, they were still willing to lend a hand for Qin Nan. Give Qin Nan some benefit. After all, he was able to attract the attention of the ancient beast of calamity, and his talent. If he were to achieve the martial monarch realm in 100 years, he would surely soar into the sky. For people like them who had been sleeping for tens of thousands of years, 100 years was just the blink of an eye. They could afford to wait. Senior Sword God and seniors, I'll leave the merging of the martial trees in your hands. Hearing this, Qin Nan brought his fists together without hesitation and no longer rejected the offer. Saying this, he sat on the ground with his legs crossed. The Divine Battle Tree and the Destruction Martial Tree floated in the air. This time, I'll merge with the martial trees and achieve the martial monarch realm. Qin Nan's eyes flickered sharply. He took out the piece of the Kanglan tree and inserted a stream of the martial ancestors' force into it. At that instant, the piece of the Kanglan tree emitted a green glow, lighting up the entire martial monarch tomb. The strong life force made the place look nothing like a tomb. The Sun and Moon Sword God and the 19 martial monarchs gathered their focus and stared at the scene without blinking. Merging 2 martial trees with Tao patterns, even they would not want to miss out on such a grand occasion. Perhaps they would even be able to comprehend the secrets hidden within. At that instant, as the tremendous force of the Kanglan tree surged into his body, Qin Nan's body began to experience a shocking change. His organs, bones, blood, etc. began to evolve. Following this, Qin Nan's divine battle spirit, which had been dormant for a long time, appeared. 2 more of the 7 crimson rays were added to its back, causing the aura of the divine god of battle to skyrocket and spread into the surroundings. Even the 36 martial monarch tombs began to tremble slightly as if they were struck by an invisible force. What's that? The Sun and Moon Sword God's eyes flickered. What just happened? His martial spirit has improved from the 7th grade Tian rank to the 9th grade Tian rank. Does that mean his martial spirit has ranked up on its own? The 19 martial monarchs were astounded too. This was the first time they had seen a martial spirit being able to rank up on its own. That being said, in their opinion, something must have happened just then. Something must have happened that allowed the martial spirit to rank up. It did not mean that the martial spirit could continue to rank up. Otherwise, it would be too terrifying. After the martial spirit evolved, the tremendous force of the Kanglan tree surged into the divine battle tree and the tree of destruction. The two martial trees emitted a blinding glow. The runes on their trunks, branches, and leaves increased rapidly, reaching a certain level. The two Tao patterns at the center of the two martial trees began to perform a magical deduction. Blue dots began to appear on the divine battle pattern, which outlined the illusionary figure of an ancient world. The black glow on the divine battle pattern grew thicker, and an ancient rune could be seen at its center. The two Tao patterns had reached their limit. If Qin Nan were to execute them again, the destruction will and the will of the divine god of battle would be utterly terrifying. Let's merge them. Qin Nan's heart was as firm as a boulder. His eyes remained calm as he unleashed his divine sense. The tremendous force of the Kanglan tree encapsulated the two martial trees and slowly approached one another. Buzz. At that instant, the divine battle tree and the destruction martial tree began to vibrate vigorously as a powerful will burst out from them. The will of the divine battle tree in particular was extremely fierce, as if it would not submit no matter how strong the force was. Such a terrifying will of resistance. The sun and moon sword god and the 19 martial monarchs held their breaths upon seeing this. With their extraordinary vision, they could easily tell that even though the force of the Kanglan tree was overwhelming, there was no way it would work if they tried to merge the two martial trees with brute force. Under such circumstances, what was Qin Nan going to do? As I thought, if I try to merge the two martial trees with brute force, there will be a backlash. If that's the case, I guess I'll have to try my luck with that method. Qin Nan's eyes flickered with determination. The path he was taking was one that no one had ever taken before. No one had ever done what he wanted to do before, thus even he was unsure if it would work. However, it was the only way. Regardless of whether it worked or failed, he had to take the risk. Divine battle tree, destruction martial tree, break. Qin Nan let out a roar as he gathered his will. End of chapter. Chapter 1265. At that instant, the destruction martial tree and the divine battle tree began to tremble vigorously. Cracks began to appear on their trunks, branches, and leaves. The other forces and wills of the monarch arts inside the martial trees began to crumble like a huge mountain that had just received a terrifying blow. What is he doing? Is he shattering his martial trees? Is he trying to reforge his martial trees? The 19 martial monarchs were astounded seeing this. Even the heart of the sun and moon sword god shuddered. They did not expect Qin Nan to be so bold as to do such a thing. Everyone knew that the martial trees and the cultivator were the same. If the martial trees were to shatter, it would result in great damage to the cultivator, and the chance of reforging the martial trees was extremely slim. Most cultivators whose martial trees were shattered would end up as cripples, forever stuck at the peak martial sacred realm. Bang! Finally, following a shocking explosion, the two martial trees completely exploded. Countless glows were emitted, illuminating the surroundings. Two terrifying forces surged into the surroundings, causing the 36 monarch tombs to suffer a great impact. The entire path began to tremble. The two magnificent martial trees were only left with two dim Tao patterns. Even the Tao patterns began to crack. Dong! At that instant, it was as if Qin Nan's figure had been struck by an atavistic giant, causing thousands of wounds to appear on his body, causing blood to spurt out from his wounds. His aura dropped from the clouds to the bottom of the valley. A terrifying pain surged into Qin Nan's mind at that instant, as if countless demons had entered his mind, opening their bloody mouths and tearing at his brain and soul, causing him to almost faint. Martial trees. Reforge! Qin Nan endured the terrifying pain and uttered a roar. His precarious willpower suddenly stabilized, burst out, accumulating to an unprecedented level. If he could not even overcome this obstacle, how could he, Qin Nan, break the South Heaven Gate, conquer the world, and reach the peak to become undefeatable? At that instant, the tremendous force of the Kanglan tree surged forward as if it was being controlled. It soon formed a 10 zhang tall, green outline of the martial ancestor tree with an ancient aura. Condense. Qin Nan's eyes were dyed red as he uttered a thunderous roar. The two dim Dao patterns covered in cracks were inserted into the outline of the martial ancestor tree under Qin Nan's shocking will. The will of the divine god of battle and the destruction will spread simultaneously, causing the martial tree to emit two powerful wills. Just like before, the martial tree, the martial tree, the martial tree, the martial tree, to compete with one another. A mountain can't tolerate two tigers. However, the martial ancestor will was significantly weaker than before. This was Qin Nan's plan, to crush the two martial trees and store the two wills in one martial tree. As a result, no matter how outstanding the two wills were, they would no longer be willing to merge into a single martial tree like before, even if they had to fight to the death. The reason being that they were only wills, thus they could not break away from the martial tree. Will of the divine god of battle, will of destruction, you are both my wills. Since you are both my wills, let's merge into one at this moment. At that instant, Qin Nan's will was fully unleashed, penetrating the barrier. Inside the embryonic martial tree, the will of the divine god of battle and the will of destruction that were competing against one another gradually weakened due to Qin Nan's shocking will. In the end, the two Dao patterns stopped competing and submitted to Qin Nan's will. They slowly merged with one another. As soon as they merged with one another, countless runes appeared on the trunk, branches, and leaves of the embryonic martial tree, as a new, terrifying force was born. Did he succeed? Did he really succeed? The Sun and Moon Sword God and the 19 martial monarchs could not help but inhale deeply upon seeing this. Even if they were in Qin Nan's shoes, they would not have the confidence to reconstruct the martial tree and merge the two wills together. This Qin Nan had really opened their eyes today. Buzz. At that instant, among the remaining 17 martial monarch tombs, 7 of them had ancient formations that were activated, emitting an ancient aura. The 7 martial monarchs that were in deep slumber were completely influenced by Qin Nan's will. Suddenly, it was as if the time between the heavens and earth had frozen. Everything in the world came to a stop. The Sun and Moon Sword God and the 26 martial monarchs clearly saw the two Dao patterns and two shocking wills in the middle of the martial tree intertwining with one another and changing continuously, resulting in various magical effects. In the end, the two Dao patterns and the two wills finally merged. Bang! A golden red glow sprang into the sky from the new martial ancestor martial tree, penetrating the chaos above it, as if it were going to shatter the space. A terrifying, icy, magnificent force burst out from the martial tree like a ferocious desolation from the 9 heavens. The ancient path was instantly covered in cracks, before it began to explode. The 36 martial monarch tombs floating on both sides of the path began to explode, as if they were struck by an ancient force. The defensive formations were completely destroyed. The Sun and Moon Sword God and the 26 martial monarchs simultaneously experienced a great impact. The impact was not because of how terrifying and powerful the force was, but the shocking will of the new martial ancestor, which had completely shaken their will. The remaining 10 martial monarch tombs that had been in a deathly silence were awakened at that instant. Even though they had no interest in Qin Nan at first, they could not help but awaken under the pressure of his terrifying will. In fact, at the end of the path, the 5 towering and domineering mountains that were shrouded in endless white fog started to glow at the same time. Even the masters of the mountains were startled. End of chapter. Chapter 1266. Chapter 1274, Monarch Horoscope. Inheriting the Monarch Horoscope. However, that was not the end of it. The space above Qin Nan's brand new martial tree began to collapse, as pitch-black figures with magnificent figures like ancient giants appeared. Each figure was emitting a terrifying aura, and their numbers were uncountable. They were formed by the rules of cultivation of the Kanglan continent. It was as if the birth of Qin Nan's martial ancestor martial tree had infuriated the heavens and earth, which had sent out an army of demons. Do it! The sun and moon sword god's deep eyes flickered coldly as he uttered a groan. With a kick, he turned into a tremendous glow and stepped into the rift. The ancient scabbard in his hand unleashed wisps of terrifying sword intense. Apart from the 10 martial monarchs who were forcibly awakened, the remaining 26 martial monarchs swiftly collected their thoughts. They rose from the martial monarch tomb and flew into the rift, unleashing a tremendous monarch aura as they executed a series of shocking monarch arts. A series of explosions took place. A terrifying battle took place in the rift. Even though the rules of cultivation were incredibly powerful, they stood no chance against the sword god and the 26 martial monarchs. In just a few thousand breaths' time, all the pitch-black figures were destroyed. At that instant, the glow of the martial tree before Qin Nan dissipated, revealing its true appearance. The martial tree was 10 zhang tall. Its trunk, branches, and leaves were emitting a strange black-golden color. An ancient pattern floated in the middle of the martial tree, which depicted a blue world. Deep inside the world, a black figure sat with his legs crossed. Even though it was not emitting any aura, anyone could sense the terrifying aura coming from the Tao pattern. The Tao pattern was now the destruction pattern of the divine god of battle. The merging of the two wills had resulted in a qualitative change. In addition to that, Qin Nan's injuries had completely recovered. Every breath he took felt like lightning was rumbling inside his body, resulting in a terrifying aura. Merging 2 martial trees was a battle to begin with, thus the person who won would evolve to a whole new level. Such a terrifying martial tree! The will of the Tao pattern. It's immeasurable. The aura that the kid is emitting is equivalent to the 4th layer martial monarch realm. Terrifying, this is too terrifying. I'm afraid even I won't stand a chance against him in terms of will alone. The secrets that the martial tree contains are too overwhelming. Even my monarch eye technique can only peek the tip of the iceberg. The sun and moon sword god and the rest of the martial monarchs returned from the rift. Their faces were filled with astonishment when they saw Qin Nan standing on the path. They exclaimed from the bottom of their hearts. Even though they were once great authorities 15,000 years ago, and were considered to be 1 in 10,000 geniuses, they were now deeply impressed by Qin Nan. If they were in the same cultivation, no one would be able to match Qin Nan's strength. It seems like this trip is worth it. The sun and moon sword god glanced at Qin Nan with a hint of admiration, even though his clone had become extremely illusionary, to the point where it was almost transparent, and was about to dissipate. Even the 5 lords have been alerted? The heart demon monarch raised his head and glanced at the end of the path. It turned out that just as Qin Nan had speculated, the 5 mountains were the tombs of the martial gods. However, the tombs of the 5 martial gods were different from the tombs of the martial monarch. No cultivator was allowed to enter them. Such a pity, such a pity. If Qin Nan was able to achieve the martial monarch realm on his own in our era, the 5 martial gods would be alerted by now. Even their true selves would show up. The heavenly destruction martial monarch let out a sigh. His eyes flickered with a hint of unwillingness. That's not all. If Qin Nan was able to achieve the martial monarch realm on his own, the entire Kanglan continent would be in an uproar even in our era. Yeah, if Qin Nan was able to achieve the martial monarch realm on his own, I wonder how strong his cultivation would be. Such a powerful martial tree, such a terrifying Tao pattern, Qin Nan is no longer just an undefeatable martial monarch. His cultivation is immeasurable. It would surpass all the geniuses in the history of the Kanglan continent. The other martial monarchs blurted out. It was as if they were imagining Qin Nan achieving the martial monarch realm in their minds. Are you done? There aren't so many ifs in this world. That's how the current era is. Either way, Qin Nan has no choice but to wait for 100 years to achieve the martial monarch realm. The heavenly circuit martial monarch said coldly. His words. The rest of the martial monarchs fell silent upon hearing this. That's right, there weren't so many ifs in this world. Even the martial god realm experts were powerless to change the current era. At that instant, the martial monarch tombs fell into a dead silence. At the end of the path, the glows emitted by the 5 mountains gradually faded away. For some reason, the atmosphere became oppressive. Seniors, thank you for your help. Qin Nan, who was sitting with his legs crossed on the path, slowly opened his eyes and brought his fists together at the martial monarch. Without the help of the martial monarchs, he would have had to put in a lot of effort to survive the calamity. Qin Nan is awake? Ha, kid, well done. The martial monarchs who had remained silent burst out laughing. Qin Nan, since you're awake, you should make a deal with the 26 martial monarchs who have helped you, and I'll send you back to the Anti-Heaven Alliance. The Sun and Moon Sword God said calmly. That's right, Qin Nan, everyone here will unleash a powerful martial monarch force to form the martial monarch pattern on your body, which will benefit you greatly. However, you have to promise us that you'll lend us a hand if you need it. The mental demon martial monarch stepped forward and said. Due to some special reason, they were unable to leave the martial monarch tombs for the time being. As such, they had to make deals with the geniuses to plan for their future. Oh? If seniors need anything in the future, I won't hesitate to help. However, there's no need for the martial monarch pattern. I do hope that seniors can protect me one more time. Qin Nan's eyes flickered as he blurted out. Protect you one more time? The 26 martial monarchs were startled. Didn't Qin Nan already merge with the martial monarch pattern? Why would he need their protection? Was Qin Nan planning to cultivate in seclusion here? Why do you need my protection? The Sun and Moon Sword God said with a frown. Because I want. Qin Nan's lips curled upward as his eyes emitted a shocking glow. This time, the blood in his body started to boil. Achieving the martial monarch realm. Following this, a magnificent, mystical force burst out from Qin Nan's body and swept the entire martial monarch tomb. End of chapter. Chapter 1267. The magnificent, mystical force was none other than the primary monarch force. The primary monarch force had been residing in Qin Nan's body for a long time, and was finally able to unleash its power today. Under Qin Nan's will, wisps of golden light with a chaotic appearance continuously entered the martial ancestor tree. They roamed inside the tree like golden dragons, causing the trunk, branches, and leaves to undergo tremendous changes. If the merging of the 2 Tao patterns was a qualitative change to his will, then the merging of the primary monarch force was a qualitative change to his strength. Evolving from the martial ancestor to the martial monarch realm was like a mortal evolving into a god. No matter how strong a mortal was, he was still a mortal. Only a god was able to control the power of a god. Howl, howl, howl. At that instant, gusts of wind appeared out of nowhere and swept across the martial monarch's tomb. The wind contained a strong imperious aura. If an ordinary cultivator were here, their mind would be shaken, and they would not dare to move forward. The gusts of wind belonged to the martial monarch realm, which would only appear when a martial monarch realm expert was trying to achieve the martial monarch realm. Is that achieving the martial monarch realm? He's achieving the martial monarch realm. He's achieving the martial monarch realm on his own. How is this possible? Why would he have the primary monarch force in his body? Weren't the rules of cultivation of the Kanglan continent altered? How is he still able to achieve the martial monarch realm on his own? Isn't the primary monarch force controlled by the monarch ranking and god ranking? Even the South Heaven Gate is helpless against it. How did he obtain the primary monarch force? The Sun and Moon Sword God and the 36 martial monarchs completely lost their composure upon seeing this. They could not help but blurt out in astonishment, as if an ancient thunderbolt had struck their souls from the 9 heavens and exploded ferociously. These authorities had gone through countless trials and tribulations. They had even witnessed the shocking battle 15,000 years ago, and the shocking change that had taken place. They had also witnessed the battle of the South Heaven 8,000 years ago. Although they were shocked, they had never felt the same as they did today. They felt as if their world had been completely turned upside down. Boom! At this moment, the 5 mountains at the end of the path erupted with a monstrous light. The light tore the white mist apart. 5 magnificent figures rose from the ground and stood at the top of the mountain. Their eyes were filled with great astonishment as they witnessed the scene before them. The 5 figures were none other than the 5 martial gods. For a long time, regardless of how talented the geniuses were, even the woman from 8,000 years ago, the 5 martial gods had never shown themselves. At most, they would only send out their divine sense to negotiate with the geniuses. But now, they were completely shaken and could no longer sit still. Achieving the martial monarch realm by oneself was already an earth-shattering matter. Furthermore, the person who had achieved the martial monarch realm on his own had surpassed the rules of cultivation, refined the Tao pattern, and merged 2 martial trees into one. However, none of this had anything to do with Qin Nan. Qin Nan's attention was fully focused on the martial ancestor tree. He was sensing the changes to the trunk, branches, and leaves. He was sensing the tremendous power of the martial ancestor as it evolved into the monarch force. When Qin Nan saw the destruction pattern of the divine god of battle on the martial tree emitting a golden glow, which was about to merge with the monarch force and evolve, his eyes flickered with a brilliant glow. Now's the time, primary monarch force, unleash it all. Qin Nan let out a roar. The primary monarch force in his body was equivalent to 2 monarch horoscope. It uttered a roar into the sky like 2 ancient golden dragons and charged into the destruction pattern of the divine god of battle. It was Qin Nan's plan. His primary monarch force was equivalent to 3 monarch horoscope. He could easily merge one of the monarch horoscopes with the martial tree to evolve it, before inserting the remaining 2 monarch horoscopes into the destruction pattern of the divine god of battle. As such, not only would he achieve the martial monarch realm on his own, he would also achieve the martial monarch realm that no one had achieved in countless years. What? His monarch force is equivalent to 3 monarch horoscopes. Equivalent to 3 monarch horoscopes? He merged 3 monarch horoscopes at once? This isn't just him achieving the martial monarch realm on his own. The Sun and Moon Sword God, the 5 martial gods, and the 36 martial monarchs were knocked a few steps back as if they had been struck by an invisible hammer. The primary monarch force equivalent to 3 monarch horoscopes was merging with his body to achieve the martial monarch realm on his own. This chapter is not finished, please turn the page. How shocking was that? It was unimaginable. Bang! A terrifying force burst out from the martial tree. The ancient path was shattered into pieces. The martial monarch tombs nearby experienced a series of shocking explosions, as if they were being attacked by an ancient deity. Countless formations and forbidding auras were shattered into pieces. If these martial monarch tombs weren't built by the disaster martial god in the past, they would most likely have been shattered into pieces by the terrifying force. At that instant, the martial tree ceased to exist, as it turned into a giant golden glow floating in the air. From afar, it looked like an ancient sun rising into the sky, illuminating the martial monarch tombs with a golden glow. Buzz. A series of ancient vibrations took place out of nowhere. It was the sound of the great Tao, which would only be triggered when someone was trying to achieve the martial monarch realm. However, normally, the sound of the great Tao would sound like 10 deities singing. However, Qin Nan's sound of the great Tao sounded like tens of thousands of deities uttering cries into the sky, as if the legendary ancient bell had been rung. At that instant, for some reason, the sun and moon sword god, the 5 martial gods, and the 36 martial monarchs suddenly felt minuscule when they saw the shocking rare phenomenon before them. It was as if they had all become mere ants. It was the difference in the nature of their forces. I once defeated all the geniuses and was ranked first in the middle continent, yet I was unable to achieve the martial monarch realm. I once triggered 9 monarch horoscopes, which was unprecedented, yet I was unable to achieve the martial monarch realm. I once received the help of the monarch horoscopes to refine the primary monarch force, yet someone set me up. My friend died, yet I was still unable to achieve the martial monarch realm. The vast continent is filled with countless changes. Countless geniuses have risen, and I want to compete for the top spot. If I don't achieve the martial monarch realm now, when should I? Qin Nan's figure rose to his feet and uttered a thunderous roar. The sharpness in his eyes seemed to pierce through the countless rays of golden light and stared right into their eyes. As if it had sensed Qin Nan's shocking will, a golden glow like that of an ancient sun burst out as a terrifying martial monarch force was unleashed. End of chapter. Chapter 1268. In just less than a few breaths' time, as more monarch force was produced, an unexpected change took place. The blinding golden glow was now emitting wisps of purple light, making it mystical and imperious. Another 5 breaths' time later, the monarch force separated from the glow as if they were being attracted by something. They roared into the sky like ancient dragons and entered Qin Nan's body. Bang bang bang. A series of explosions took place inside Qin Nan's body like a raging storm. Qin Nan's flesh, bones, and blood were now purple-golden, emitting wisps of martial monarch intent. His sturdiness, strength, etc. had reached an unprecedented level. Most likely, he could withstand the attack of a monarch weapon with his physical body alone. If Qin Nan's heart had the same change, it would truly be the flesh of a martial monarch. Buzz. Suddenly, the purple glow floating in the air emitted a strong absorption force, causing the purple glow to shrink toward the center. In the end, it turned into a purple-golden ancient pattern. Inside the purple-golden pattern was a blue world. Inside the world, Qin Nan was wearing a black robe and had black hair. He was sitting on a blue mountain with his legs crossed, staring into the sky. Above the firmament, there was an illusory figure that was green in color. The purple-golden pattern was the martial monarch force. The black robe, the black hair, and the black mountain were the destruction will. The illusionary blue figure that Qin Nan was staring at was the figure of the divine god of battle. The 3 forces had merged into one, forming the divine god of battle's destruction monarch pattern. Purple-golden. Purple-golden martial monarch force. The martial monarch force of every martial monarch is golden, but his martial monarch force is purple-golden. Is this the real martial monarch force? This is the real way to achieve the martial monarch realm. The sun and moon sword god, the 5 martial gods, and the 36 martial monarchs were astounded at first, before murmuring as a thought crossed their minds. His face was filled with absent-mindedness. They had once inherited the monarch horoscope. They had imagined countless times how it would be like to achieve the martial monarch realm on their own. Today they finally found out the truth. "Refine into my heart." Qin Nan let out a roar seeing this. The divine god of battle's destruction monarch pattern immediately turned into a blinding ray flying toward Qin Nan's figure. To achieve the martial monarch realm, one would first need to merge the martial tree with the monarch horoscope to produce the monarch force. Some of the monarch force would be used to cleanse one's flesh, while the rest would be merged with one's heart to form a monarch heart. The heart was the source of the martial monarch's strength. Once the monarch's heart was refined, the monarch's undertaking would be completed, and one would be able to control the monarch's power. He's going to refine the martial monarch heart. The sun and moon sword god, the 5 martial gods, and the 36 martial monarchs were astounded. Their eyes were fixed on the scene, not willing to miss a single detail. They all had the same question in their minds. Once he refined the martial monarch heart, he would trigger the tribulation and achieve the martial monarch realm. What kind of rare phenomenon would Qin Nan trigger? Qin Nan had achieved the martial monarch realm on his own, with 3 monarch horoscopes and the Tao map. The rare phenomenon that he would trigger would not be the same as the rare phenomenon of beasts roaring into the heavens when cultivators achieved the martial monarch realm. However, at that instant, an unexpected change took place all of a sudden. "You mere ants dare to achieve the martial monarch realm on your own." A voice filled with shocking fury exploded like a thunderclap. Following a loud explosion, the sky above the martial monarch tomb that the disaster martial god had constructed was penetrated with brute force, leaving a huge gap. Inside the gap stood a white-haired old man with a terrifying aura. His eyes were locked onto Qin Nan as he stepped forward with tremendous murderous intent. The spirit of the monarch ranking? Qin Nan, who was refining the martial monarch heart, the sun and moon sword god, the 5 martial gods, and the martial monarchs raised their heads. When they saw the figure, their hearts trembled, and they were stunned. No one had expected the spirit of the monarch ranking to show up. Die. It was as if the spirit of the monarch ranking did not recognize Qin Nan. He didn't say much, and his eyes were filled with cold, killing intent. The spirit of the monarch ranking raised its skinny hand, as a pitch-black ancient sword appeared in its hand. It took a step forward, causing the surroundings to darken instantly, as a terrifying sword intent slashed in Qin Nan's direction. The entire martial monarch tomb began to tremble vigorously at that instant. The power of the slash was too terrifying. "Crap, stop him." The sun and moon sword god, the 5 martial gods, and the 36 martial monarchs were startled. Without hesitation, they unleashed their godly rays and monarch glows, executing shocking attacks aimed at the spirit of the monarch ranking. Although they had no idea why the spirit of the monarch ranking would show up all of a sudden, they would not allow Qin Nan to be killed without doing anything. Bang bang bang! A series of shocking explosions immediately took place. Even though the spirit of the monarch ranking possessed extraordinary strength, it was still knocked back by the 5 martial gods and the 36 martial monarchs. "Inform me at once." After executing the attack, the sun and moon sword god immediately took out a badge without hesitation and transmitted a message. Following this, his figure completely shattered into pieces, leaving nothing behind. However, an unexpected occurrence took place once again. The entire martial monarch tomb began to tremble vigorously. Accompanied by a terrifying explosion, the space above actually collapsed once more, and an even larger hole than before appeared. They could only see a red-haired old man with a magnificent aura walking out from the gap. The appearance of the old man caused everything at the scene to be overshadowed. even the spirit of the monarch ranking was no exception. Is that the spirit of the god ranking? The 5 martial gods and the 36 martial monarchs held their breaths and were astounded seeing this. They had never expected that even the spirit of the god list would come to kill them. You mere ants dare to achieve the martial monarch realm on your own. The spirit of the god ranking uttered a furious roar. Its eyes stared at Qin Nan with a shocking murderous intent. Die. The spirit of the god ranking did not waste any time. It stepped forward and attacked. End of chapter. Chapter 1269. The spirit of the god ranking was even more terrifying than the spirit of the martial monarchs. A boundless godly glow appeared above the martial monarch's tomb and rapidly accumulated. In the blink of an eye, it turned into a shocking godly saber with a terrifying saber intent slashing down at the martial monarch's tomb. It felt like the slash was not only going to shatter Qin Nan into pieces, it was going to shatter the martial monarch's tomb too. You guys stop the spirit of the martial monarchs, we'll deal with the spirit of the god ranking. Among the 5 martial gods, a middle-aged man with an imperious expression and 2 ancient runes in his eyes spoke. While speaking, he performed a hand seal, causing countless runes to appear above Qin Nan. The other 4 martial gods performed hand seals and executed their god arts too. Acknowledged. The 36 martial monarchs did not hesitate after hearing the order. With a thought, the 36 martial monarch tombs were activated simultaneously, which emitted a shocking monarch glow like 36 ancient monarch beasts roaring and charging at the spirit of the martial monarchs. Bang! 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 Countless terrifying gusts of wind were unleashed at that instant. The entire void was forcefully shattered into pieces. If an ordinary martial monarch were to be caught in the middle of the battle, any monarch art would be completely useless, as they would die on the spot. That being said, even though the spirit of the god ranking and the spirit of the monarch ranking were powerful, they still managed to hold their ground against the 5 martial gods and the 36 martial monarchs. Qin Nan, they are here for you. Don't waste any more time, hurry up and achieve the martial monarch realm. The martial god with the runes in his eyes yelled. Got it! Qin Nan, who was still in a daze, quickly collected his thoughts upon hearing the words. He immediately prepared to refine the monarch heart. However, at this moment, something strange happened once again. A huge gap appeared above the martial monarch's tomb, which was even bigger than the gap that the spirit of the god ranking had created. Countless blue glows were emitted from the gap. Within the glows, an ancient, magnificent door was vaguely visible, with an indescribable aura. South Heaven Gate? At this moment, 5. The martial god and the 36 martial monarchs felt like they had been struck by lightning. Their scalps turned numb as a great chill ran down their spines. As martial gods and martial monarchs, they were well aware of how terrifying the South Heaven Gate was. If the monarch ranking and god ranking did not work together, they would not stand a chance against the South Heaven Gate. And now, even the South Heaven Gate was here? Ants like you dare to achieve the martial monarch realm on your own. A terrifying roar exploded like a bolt of lightning. Die! As the word was uttered, a brilliant blue glow burst out from the South Heaven Gate like the breath of a godly dragon. It possessed a terrifying aura and an unbelievable speed as it sprang in Qin Nan's direction. Sacred Mountain. The 5 martial gods snap. The 5 sacred mountains at the end of the path let out a series of rumbling noises as they flew forward on their own. They arrived above Qin Nan at a shocking pace and combined into a barrier. However, deep inside the shocking blue glow, an ancient mystical glow burst out. The blue glow penetrated the 5 sacred mountains and landed on Qin Nan's head without any hindrance. It turned out that the blue glow contained a magical force. The magical force was able to penetrate anything in the world. It's over. The eyes of the 5 martial gods and the 36 martial monarchs widened when they saw this. Their god force and monarch force froze on the spot. The South Heaven Gate's attack was too quick, too terrifying. Besides, they were only trying their best to resist the spirits of the monarch ranking and god ranking. Now, they could not spare any effort to protect Qin Nan. Could it be that the only genius who had managed to achieve the martial monarch realm on his own was going to die here today? Spirits of the monarch ranking, god ranking, South Heaven Gate, are you seriously trying to kill someone in my territory? Aren't you looking down on my calamity a little too much? Suddenly, it was as if time had frozen as a hoarse, cold laugh could be heard. At the end of the path in the distance, the ancient heaven's boulder suddenly emitted a terrifying calamity glow that intertwined with one another. It seemed to have formed a calamity realm above Qin Nan. Bang! Following a terrifying explosion, the entire martial monarch tomb was covered in crack. The attack was blocked with brute force. It's the calamity martial god. The 5 martial gods and the 36 martial monarchs shuddered, their faces filled with joy. However, they soon thought of something, and the joy on their faces instantly disappeared. The current calamity martial god was no longer the same calamity martial god in the past. Even with the help of the calamity forest, would it really be enough to stop the South Heaven Gate? Whoosh! The South Heaven Gate made its move again after its first attack failed. This time, it was no longer a tremendous blue glow, but an entire door that descended upon Qin Nan in a terrifying manner, crushing straight at Qin Nan's figure. From afar, it looked like an ancient mountain crushing an ant. The difference between the two was too great. Ha, Qin Nan kid, you've given me such a great surprise. I didn't expect you to be able to achieve the martial monarch realm on your own. I wasn't wrong. However, South Heaven Gate, spirits of the monarch ranking and god ranking, you're dreaming if you think you can kill him today. A burst of thunderous laughter echoed above the martial monarch's tombs. Through the giant gap, one could see an ancient pagoda in the boundless rift, emitting the aura of a peerless ruler. A mysterious young man emitting a mystical glow stepped out from the pagoda with a tremendous aura. It was the martial serendipity pavilion. South Heaven Gate, I didn't expect you to be so shameless. However, before the martial serendipity pavilion could make its move, an icy roar exploded inside Qin Nan's body. A brilliant glow burst out from Qin Nan's body and sprang into the sky. Inside the glow, a glamorous figure wearing an immortal robe with an icy gaze appeared, as if she had descended from the 9 heavens, emitting a terrifying aura that suppressed everything in the place. The figure was none other than the woman in the copper mirror, the person from 8,000 years ago in the Kanglan continent, the person that countless experts and authorities were familiar with, feared, and admired. Piss off. End of chapter. Chapter 1270. The woman immediately made her move. She waved her hand and flicked her finger, firing a terrifying glow that collided with the South Heaven Gate, resulting in a shocking explosion. The magnificent, imperious South Heaven Gate was knocked back at that instant. The intertwining blue glow was shattered into pieces. Cracks even began to appear at the center of the gate, spreading in all directions. Break! The woman's attack did not stop there. She immediately executed another attack, shattering the South Heaven Gate into pieces. It turned into countless blue glows that filled the surroundings. Ha ha ha, as expected of Senior Feiyue. Leave them to me. The mysterious young man of the martial serendipity pavilion burst out laughing. He immediately raised his hands and fired several crimson-red chains from his palms. They were like ancient dragons from hell, which collided with the spirits of the monarch ranking and god ranking. Even though the spirits of the monarch ranking and god ranking were quick to react, they still failed to escape from the chains. Their figures were bound by the chains. Following this, several crimson-red glows burst out from the chains, shattering the spirits of the monarch ranking and god ranking into pieces. It seems like the rumors are true. The spirits of the monarch ranking, god ranking, and the south heaven gate are only a wisp of their will that they have planted in the heavens and earth. When someone self-achieves the martial monarch realm, the wisp of will be triggered to eliminate the person. What a powerful move! If an ordinary person was able to achieve the martial monarch realm on their own by chance, they would most likely die without anyone protecting them. The mysterious young man of the martial serendipity pavilion said with a hollow laugh. Hearing this, the 5 martial gods and 36 martial monarchs immediately collected their thoughts. No wonder the spirits of monarch ranking, god ranking, and the south heaven gate only displayed such a weak strength. Their will has been triggered by Qin Nan. I believe their actual selves have sensed it. Go and seal off the heavenly fortune for Qin Nan. The woman in the bronze mirror said coldly. Her figure flashed and disappeared into the bronze mirror again. Initially, the martial serendipity pavilion was enough to resolve the danger that Qin Nan was in. However, when she saw the will of the south heaven gate descending, her heart was filled with murderous intent, thus she immediately made her move. What the Lord said is extremely true. Friend Hernan, help us seal it off together. This chapter is not finished, please turn the page. The mysterious young man of the martial serendipity pavilion shrugged his shoulders without showing any sign of complaint. He raised his head and said into the distance, "So this is your plan, your foresight is really accurate." The hoarse voice of the calamity martial god appeared, which seemed to be filled with a hint of envy. Following it, wisps of calamity aura burst out from his body and landed on the martial monarch's tombs. Haha, of course. The mysterious young man of the martial serendipity pavilion burst out laughing as he performed a hand seal, firing a series of mystical runes into the air, sealing off the aura of the tomb. On the other side, the 5 martial gods and 36 martial monarchs were astounded as they collected their thoughts. They did not expect the martial serendipity pavilion to be protecting Qin Nan all this while, and that the Lord was actually Qin Nan's tribulation of 3 lifetimes. Could it be? The 5 martial gods and the 36 martial monarchs were startled as a thought crossed their mind. Their eyes flickered as they fixed their gazes on Qin Nan. A genius who had achieved the martial monarch realm on his own, with the protection of the martial serendipity pavilion, and the tribulation of 3 lifetimes. How strong would he be in the future? In other words, would the situation that had remained the same for 15,000 years change because of him? However, regardless of whether it was the copper mirror, the martial serendipity pavilion, or the thoughts of the martial gods and martial monarchs, Qin Nan was completely unaware of them. His mind was completely immersed in his heart. Refine. Qin Nan took hold of the opportunity and unleashed his will with a groan. The monarch pattern of the divine god of battle and destruction that flew into his body roared like a swimming dragon. It circulated in his meridians before flying into his heart and merging with it. At that instant, a terrifying monarch aura burst out from Qin Nan's body. Meanwhile, in a mysterious place in the middle continent of the Kanglan continent, inside a wooden residence, a white-haired old man was staring at a black and white chessboard with a frown. Suddenly, a loud bang was heard. The bluestone chessboard was actually shattered. "Is that?" The white-haired old man was startled. He closed his eyes and pondered for a moment. His expression changed tremendously when he realized something. Who would have thought? A person who had achieved the martial monarch realm on his own? On top of that, the wisp of will that he had planted in the rules of the heavens and earth had been erased? In other words, not only had someone achieved the martial monarch realm on his own, there was also a powerful existence protecting him. Are you aware of it too? An emotionless voice appeared, which turned out to be the spirit of the god ranking. Brother, the person has even sealed off the heavenly fortune. Could it be the South Heaven Gate's doing? the white-haired old man said with a slightly unpleasant expression. Allowing someone to achieve the martial monarch realm on their own, I don't think the South Heaven Gate has the ability to do so. I believe it's the doing of the person behind the South Heaven Gate, who is targeting us. The spirit of the god ranking said calmly. What should we do then? The white-haired old man immediately asked. We'll alter the rules of the heavens and earth to prevent them from triggering the tribulation. They will be exposed when the time comes. Once that happens, we'll think of a way to deal with them. The spirit of the god ranking said. Got it. Meanwhile, in the Kanglan continent, the half-god region, the land of extreme difficulty, a magnificent, magnificent, ancient door stood firmly on the ground, as if it was connected to the 9 heavens and the 9 underworlds, suppressing the entire continent. Suddenly, the door emitted a mystical glow. Self-achieving the martial monarch realm, the protection of an expert, sealing off the heavenly fortune. Who exactly is it? The voice was slightly furious, which turned out to be the spirit of the South Heaven Gate. It must be the monarch ranking and the god ranking. You will alter the rules of the heavens and earth to prevent them from triggering the tribulation. An ancient voice appeared inside the South Heaven Gate. That's the only way. The spirit of the South Heaven Gate fell silent for a moment before speaking. Following this, the ancient, magnificent, imperious door emitted an ancient glow, causing the southernmost place to tremble, as the heavens and earth underwent a shocking change. However, when the South Heaven Gate, the god ranking, and the monarch ranking were making their moves, they did not expect the person who had self-achieved the martial monarch realm to be a 3-starred enemy in the former's eyes, while the latter two treated him as a pawn, someone who had no future in the eyes of many, but Qin Nan was the same. End of chapter. Chapter 1271. Meanwhile, in the wretched disaster forest, the martial monarch's tomb. A magnificent monarch aura burst out from Qin Nan's figure as wisps of purple-golden glow were emitted from his body. It was like an ancient chaos beast was breathing, which occasionally dyed the whole place purple-golden. Bang! A deafening explosion took place on Qin Nan's body, as a terrifying force burst out from his body, shattering the damaged path into pieces. Strong gusts of wind swept in all directions. Such a powerful flesh! The mysterious young man of the martial serendipity pavilion, the 5 martial gods, and the 36 martial monarchs smacked their lips upon seeing this. They could easily tell that Qin Nan had refined the monarch flesh, and it was an extremely terrifying monarch flesh. Even a second-layer martial monarch would not be able to do anything to the body. Thud, thud, thud. Suddenly, the purple-golden heart inside Qin Nan's body, which had transformed into the divine battle-destruction monarch heart, began to beat vigorously, producing a shocking noise, as if thousands of ancient giants were running across the land. After 30 breaths' time, the heartbeat finally came to a stop. Whoosh! As soon as the heartbeat stopped, streams of primary monarch force were produced rapidly, flowing into the heart like a surging river. In the blink of an eye, it formed an enormous monarch force river, which was filled with endless monarch force. At that instant, Qin Nan's aura changed tremendously, as if he had turned from a towering tree into an imperious mountain, capable of stirring the wind of the heavens and earth, and intimidating the crowd with a single move. Is this the 6th-layer martial monarch realm? The mysterious young man of the martial serendipity pavilion, the 5 martial gods, and the 36 martial monarchs could not help but inhale deeply. The transformation of achieving the martial monarch realm on his own was even more terrifying than they had imagined. They initially thought their strength would at most be equivalent to the 3rd-layer martial monarch realm after achieving the martial monarch realm. However, even though Qin Nan had just achieved the 1st-layer martial monarch realm, his aura and monarch force were equivalent to the 6th-layer martial monarch realm. In terms of true battle prowess, he was probably even stronger than that. That being said, it was mainly because Qin Nan had merged 9 martial trees into one, combined the power of the pieces of the Kanglan tree, and merged the 2 Tao patterns into one. Finally, I have become a great emperor. Qin Nan slowly opened his eyes, as his face was filled with joy. This day had finally arrived. From this moment onward, he had reached the level of an authority of the Kanglan continent. He was qualified to learn the secrets of the Kanglan continent. Not only that, he could also use the monarch force to save Jiang Bailan. That's right, Quintessence Emperor Qi. The Copper Mirror told me that once I successfully achieved the martial monarch realm, I would be able to absorb the monarch force from the heavens and earth to save Jiang Bailan. Let's give it a try. Upon having this thought, Qin Nan immediately withdrew his thoughts and sat down with his legs crossed, unleashing the divine battle spirit. After achieving the martial monarch realm, he was able to absorb the monarch force with his martial spirit, instead of absorbing Qi with his martial spirit. As soon as the 9th grade Tian ranked divine battle spirit was activated, it immediately unleashed a terrifying absorption force, which rapidly absorbed the Qi of the martial monarch's tomb like a black hole. What's going on? Qin Nan was slightly startled. Why was the divine battle spirit still absorbing Qi instead of the martial monarch force? I forgot something important. Even though I've refined the martial monarch flesh, martial monarch heart, and martial monarch force, I have yet to undergo the tribulation. Only by undergoing the tribulation will I be acknowledged by the heavens and earth, allowing me to absorb the monarch force. Qin Nan patted his forehead as a thought crossed his mind. Let's start the tribulation then. Qin Nan withdrew the divine battle spirit and exhaled deeply. His gaze sharpened as he raised his head and stared into the sky. The divine battle destruction monarch heart in his body was activated for the first time. The tribulation, if not now, when will it descend? Qin Nan uttered thunderously, as if he were questioning the heavens, resulting in a magnificent aura. He did not put up any defensive measures. He did not even draw out the heaven-shattering saber. The reason being that the tribulation was different when one achieved the martial monarch realm. Even though the tribulation was fairly powerful, ordinary martial monarchs could easily resist it. At most, they would only suffer some minor injuries. In many people's eyes, the tribulation of the martial monarch realm was only a simple process. A few breaths later, Qin Nan frowned once again. Normally, the heavens and earth would be infuriated by his provocation and summon the tribulation. Why wasn't there any reaction? The tribulation of the martial monarch realm didn't appear? Could it be? The 5 martial gods and 36 martial monarchs were startled upon seeing this. They immediately recalled something when they collected their thoughts. They're quick to act. Qin Nan, stop trying. The tribulation won't descend, as they've already altered the rules of cultivation. The mysterious young man of the martial serendipity pavilion wore a cold grin. His eyes flickered coldly. He was quite disgusted by what they were doing. Senior, are you referring to the monarch ranking, god ranking, South Heaven Gate, and the others? What do you mean by altering the rules of cultivation? Qin Nan glanced at the mysterious young man and asked, You're now a half-martial monarch, so I can tell you some things, but I can't tell you everything. In simple words, the monarch ranking, god ranking, and South Heaven Gate have altered the rules of cultivation, so the tribulation won't descend upon those who have achieved the martial monarch realm on their own. The mysterious young man of the martial serendipity pavilion explained. Won't descend upon those who have achieved the martial monarch realm on their own? Qin Nan was startled. He did not expect the monarch ranking, god ranking, and South Heaven Gate to be so powerful to be able to do something like that. Why would they do that? Qin Nan took a deep breath. His eyes flickered coldly. He could more or less understand why the South Heaven Gate was targeting him. However, why would the monarch ranking and god ranking target him? If it weren't for the 5 martial gods, 36 martial monarchs, the martial serendipity pavilion, and the copper mirror, he would have died to the will of the monarch ranking and god ranking. Initially, Qin Nan was only cautious toward the monarch ranking and god ranking. Now, he was filled with murderous intent. End of chapter. Chapter 1272. We'll talk about it later. Let's settle this first. The mysterious young man of the martial serendipity pavilion said with a calm smile. He glanced at the 5 martial gods and the 36 martial monarchs. Qin Nan immediately nodded. He withheld his murderous intent and glanced at the expert. Seniors, thank you for your help. I'll never forget your kindness. Qin Nan brought his fists together at the 5 martial gods and the 36 martial monarchs with a stern look. If it weren't for them, he might not even be able to achieve the martial monarch realm. Haha, Qin Nan, you're being too courteous. It's only a small matter. Don't mention it. That's right. The 5 martial gods and the 36 martial monarchs shook their heads and said smilingly. Unknowingly, their attitude toward Qin Nan began to change. Even though Qin Nan was only a half-martial monarch, they were utterly impressed by the strength and talents that Qin Nan had displayed. Besides, the problem with the tribulation was easy to solve too. Qin Nan, congratulations. A hoarse voice echoed in the sky. Following it, a pitch-black, twisted figure appeared in the air, which turned out to be the master of the wretched disaster forest, the will of the disaster martial god. Disaster, let me be frank. Before Qin Nan actually achieves the martial monarch realm, if you leak any information about him, your wretched disaster forest will be destroyed. The mysterious young man of the martial serendipity pavilion said calmly. Of course, we'll keep the secret. However, we do hope that Qin Nan will lend us a hand when he achieves great success in the future. The disaster martial god said without showing any sign of anger. Senior, I won't turn you down. Qin Nan said. Qin Nan, this is a gift from us. You might need it in the future. The martial god whose eyes were filled with runes said as he performed a hand seal. The other martial gods and martial monarchs nodded and performed hand seals too. Diagram of gods and emperors, condense. The 5 martial gods and 36 martial monarchs uttered a roar and flicked their fingers at Qin Nan, firing 41 rays of light onto Qin Nan's figure, which slowly formed a pattern on his left arm. The pattern contained the will of the 5 martial gods and 36 martial monarchs. If it was activated, it would possess extremely terrifying destructive power. Qin Nan, let's go first. Someone is waiting for you. The mysterious young man of the martial serendipity pavilion smilingly said after seeing this. Many thanks, seniors. Qin Nan didn't move. Instead, he cupped his hands again. Following this, after having a brief chat with the disaster martial god, the martial gods, and the authorities, Qin Nan returned to the martial serendipity pavilion with the mysterious young man. Big brother, what should we do next? The martial god with runes in his eyes immediately asked. Continue to choose the successor of disaster. The disaster martial god raised his head, as if he was staring at something. He said with a hoarse voice, even though Qin Nan's rise is extremely terrifying, have you forgotten about the great battle 15,000 years ago? Now we can only wait and watch the tigers fight one another. Hearing this, the 5 martial gods and 36 martial monarchs took a deep breath. Their faces darkened as if they had recalled something. That was right, they could only wait and watch the tigers fight one another. After all, the monarch ranking, the god ranking, the South Heaven Gate, and the person behind the South Heaven Gate were too terrifying. Meanwhile, in the boundless rift, the 5th layer of the martial serendipity pavilion. Qin Nan, even though the monarch ranking and the god ranking aren't your true enemies, and sometimes you even need to team up with them, you've crossed their bottom line by achieving the martial monarch realm on your own. You can either submit to them or be killed by them. The mysterious young man said slowly. crossed their bottom line? What bottom line? Qin Nan asked. Let's take the Monarch Horoscope Contest and the God Horoscope Contest as an example. The Monarch Ranking and the God Horoscope Contest were meant to let the cultivators absorb their Monarch horoscopes and God horoscope. Now that you've achieved the martial Monarch realm on your own, it means you no longer need to inherit the Monarch horoscopes, or even the God horoscope. It's a great threat to you. The mysterious young man's eyes glinted. I see. By the way, Senior, can you tell me the secrets of the Kanglan continent now? Qin Nan nodded. He suddenly thought of something and continued to ask. When he first arrived at the Middle Continent, the Martial Serendipity Pavilion had told him that it would tell him the real secrets of the Kanglan continent when he achieved the Martial Monarch realm on his own. I can't tell you yet. Before the mysterious young man could speak, a cold and indifferent voice rang out. Qin Nan turned his head to look and was shocked. Out of nowhere, another person had appeared on the 5th floor. The person was wearing a white robe, standing with his hands behind him. His eyes were sharp, and his eye-catching white hair drifted in the wind. From afar, it felt like everything in the world was insignificant before him, including the Martial Serendipity Pavilion. Qin Nan had seen the person before. He was the leader of the Anti-Heaven Alliance, the Magical Hair Sword God. However, the Magical Hair Sword God was actually the Martial Serendipity Pavilion. And now, the Magical Hair Sword God was here in person? You're only a half-martial monarch now. In the past, we, including the person from 8,000 years ago, all swore an oath when we achieved the martial monarch realm. If we were to tell you the truth, we would suffer a great blow. The Magical Hair Sword God stepped forward and said calmly, Magical Hair, why are you here in person? Didn't you say that Qin Nan was still not worthy enough for you? The mysterious young man of the Martial Serendipity Pavilion said with a grin. He wasn't worthy enough for me in the past, but now, he has indeed impressed me. I'll have to adjust my plan accordingly. The Magical Hair Sword God said calmly, without any hint of awkwardness. He's only a half-martial monarch. Qin Nan clenched his fists tightly. Even though his cultivation was now at the 1st layer martial monarch realm, which was equivalent to the 6th layer martial monarch realm of the Kanglan continent, and the tribulation was only a part of the process, it was extremely important to him now. If he could not absorb the primary monarch force, he would not be able to save Jiang Bailan. Jiang Bailan had died for him in the past. How could he not save her? Senior, Alliance Leader, do you know if there's any way to trigger the tribulation? Qin Nan let out a sigh and asked. As a matter of fact, he had encountered the problem of the tribulation in the past too. He had solved it with the help of the mysterious golden seal. However, the tribulation force required to trigger the tribulation was too enormous. Besides, the Monarch Horoscope Contest had already ended, thus he could not absorb the tribulation force of the other martial monarchs. Therefore, it was better to find another way. There are 2 ways. The Magical Hair Sword God glanced at Qin Nan with a grin. First, kill millions of cultivators and trigger the wrath of the heavens and earth, thus triggering the tribulation. Second, go to the 7th forbidden area. End of chapter. Chapter 1273. The eyes of the mysterious young man of the Martial Serendipity Pavilion flickered upon hearing this, but he did not say anything. You better choose the first option. The first one is very simple. The South Heaven Sacred Ground has recruited a huge number of disciples from the Middle Continent. With your cultivation, you can easily slaughter 300,000 of them. The remaining 700,000 cultivators can slaughter the disciples of various factions, or head to the Middle Continent, or the 4 great continents. Killing 100 is considered an emperor, killing 10,000 is considered a sacred, and killing 1,000,000 is considered a monarch. The Magical Hair Sword God said calmly, as if the lives of 1,000,000 cultivators were only 1,000,000 ants in his eyes. It did not matter even if they were killed. Alliance leader, I will never do the first option. Please tell me the second option. Qin Nan rejected without hesitation. Even though the Kanglan continent followed the law of the jungle, where strength was everything, regardless of how strong or weak one was, everyone was still a living being. He had no enmity with the others, so he would definitely not start a massacre for his own personal gain. Sure. As everyone knows, there used to be 7 forbidden grounds, which are the God-Beast Forbidden Ground, the Lost Herb Garden, the Godly Exterminator Platform, the Martial Serendipity Realm, the Wretched Disaster Forest, the 9 Words Ancient Sea, and the Tao Origin Heavenly Mountain. On the Tao Origin Heavenly Mountain, there's a mysterious place that is not affected by the Monarch ranking, God ranking, and South Heaven Gate. Once you reach there, you can communicate with the heavens and earth, trigger the tribulation, and achieve the martial monarch realm on your own. However, unlike the Godly Exterminator Platform, the Martial Serendipity Realm, the Wretched Disaster Forest, and the 9 Words Ancient Sea, the Tao Origin Heavenly Mountain has disappeared for a few thousand years. The magical hair sword god said calmly, without any change in his expression. I see. Qin Nan nodded. He had just learned that the Forbidden Grounds had always been selecting their successors. It seemed like he was the successor chosen by the Martial Serendipity Realm, or the Martial Serendipity Pavilion, while Tang Qingshan and Gong Yang were the successors chosen by the Godly Exterminator Platform and the 9 Words Ancient Sea. Alliance leader, are you saying that we should find the Tao Origin Heavenly Mountain? Qin Nan shook his head and stopped thinking about it. You don't have to do it yourself. I have my ways to make the Tao Origin Heavenly Mountain reappear. However, do you know how dangerous it will be for you at that time? The magical hair sword god stared at Qin Nan, his eyes becoming even sharper. It was as if 2 divine swords were about to slash out, making it impossible for one to look at them directly. It gave off a great feeling of intimidation. At this moment, the atmosphere in the surroundings also became tense. I know, but it doesn't matter. Qin Nan met the magical hair sword god's gaze without fear. His eyes were filled with determination. He understood the danger that the magical hair sword god was talking about. If the Tao Origin Heavenly Mountain that had disappeared from the continent for a few thousand years were to reappear, the 3 great factions, the Forbidden Grounds, the 8 ancient tribes, and the martial monarchs hiding in the half-god region would make their way there in person. By then, not only would Qin Nan have to face the authorities, his self-achievement of the martial monarch realm would shock the entire half-god region, or even the entire Kanglan continent. When that happened, the monarch ranking, the god ranking, the South Heaven Gate, and the authorities would most likely set their eyes on him. But what difference would it make? It was only a matter of time before his self-achievement of the martial monarch realm was exposed. There was no way he could keep it a secret. If that was the case, why not make it even fiercer when the storm was coming? Very well, when the time comes, I'll look for the Tao Origin Heavenly Mountain myself. In around half a year, it will reappear. Qin Nan, from this moment onward, I'll do my best to help you. If you need anything in the future, you can contact me through this badge. The magical hair sword god nodded. His eyes flickered as he handed Qin Nan a white jade badge. If the authorities of the Anti-Heaven Alliance were to see this, they would be dumbfounded, as no one had ever received the magical hair sword god's badge, not even his disciples, Martial Monarch Minkong and Martial Monarch Rongtian. Alliance leader, this. Qin Nan was startled. He did not expect the magical hair sword god to ask him to look for the Tao Origin Heavenly Mountain himself. One must know that there was no relationship between the two of them, not to mention that the magical hair sword god had given him his badge. There's no need to say anything, and there's no need to thank me. It's all for the sake of shattering the South Heaven Gate. As long as I can shatter the South Heaven Gate, I won't hesitate to kill the entire world and destroy everything. As soon as the words were spoken, the magical hair sword god's eyes instantly became bloodshot as a terrifying murderous intent and hatred burst out from his body, causing his white robe to flap wildly despite the absence of wind. The entire residence began to tremble vigorously, and even the surrounding space was dyed red by the aura. The magical hair sword god was infuriated. Such a strong murderous intent and hatred. Qin Nan's heart shuddered. What exactly had the South Heaven Gate done to make the magical hair sword god hate it so much? Magical hair, are you trying to destroy my place? The mysterious young man of the martial serendipity pavilion blurted out as his eyelids jumped. Sorry, I've lost my composure. The magical hair sword god collected his thoughts and withdrew his murderous intent and hatred. If that's the case, I won't waste any more time. I'll remember your kindness and try my best to shatter the South Heaven Gate in the future. Qin Nan said slowly without any hesitation. Perhaps it was because he had witnessed the magical hair sword god's hatred toward the South Heaven Gate. Qin Nan's attitude toward him had changed slightly. He no longer felt like a stranger to him. All right, I'll be going. The magical hair sword god nodded and disappeared with a tap of his foot. Qin Nan, remember not to expose yourself in the next half a year. The monarch ranking, god ranking, and the South Heaven Gate are surely suspicious of one another. They won't suspect you, but if you do, they will surely find out. It'll be troublesome. The mysterious young man of the martial serendipity pavilion said with a stern expression. I'll keep that in mind, but Senior, are the monarch ranking, god ranking, and the South Heaven Gate enemies? Qin Nan swiftly asked after nodding. He was only aware of the existence of the 3 great factions, the 7 forbidden grounds, and the 8 ancient tribes in the half-god region, but he was clueless about their relationship. For now they are enemies. Otherwise, I'm afraid the Kanglan continent is going to face a real calamity. The mysterious young man of the martial serendipity pavilion said with a calm smile. A real calamity? Senior, I'm well aware of the South Heaven Gate's strength, but what are the cultivations of the monarch ranking and god ranking? Qin Nan asked the question that had been bothering him. Being able to alter the rules of the heavens and earth was beyond the capabilities of a martial god. The secrets of the monarch ranking, the god ranking, the South Heaven Gate, the battle 15,000 years ago, and the battle 8,000 years ago, I can't tell you about them. You will only know them after you've achieved the martial monarch realm. The mysterious young man of the martial serendipity pavilion hesitated as his eyes became thoughtful. However, I can tell you one thing. 15,000 years ago, or in other worlds or even above the 9 heavens, you didn't need a martial spirit to cultivate. You didn't need to inherit a monarch horoscope or refine a god horoscope to become a martial monarch or a martial god. End of chapter. Chapter 1274. The words served as a shocking explosion. 15,000 years ago in the Kanglan continent, one didn't even need a martial spirit to cultivate? Qin Nan's heart shuddered violently as his eyes widened. As everyone knew, in the Kanglan continent, one had to awaken a martial spirit in order to become a martial artist. Only by using a martial spirit could one communicate with the heavens and earth and absorb qi. Besides, martial spirits were classified into 4 grades: Tian, Di, Xian, and Huang. Each grade was further divided into 10 grades. Due to the limitation of the martial spirits in the Kanglan continent, only when one's martial spirit reached a certain grade could one become an expert. For example, a 10th grade Huang-ranked martial spirit would never be able to become a martial dominator. The only way to achieve a breakthrough was to alter one's destiny. As such, countless hard-working martial artists in the Kanglan continent could not even reach the martial dominator realm due to a lack of fortunate encounters. However, all of this turned out to be a setup. Qin Nan took a deep breath. He could only feel several giant pitch-black hands looming over the entire Kanglan continent, blocking the path of cultivation. Countless cultivators below the martial monarch realm were clueless about it, but they were still willing to give it their all in order to obtain a powerful martial spirit. This world is a lot darker than what we have imagined. Be it the monarch ranking, god ranking, or the people at the South Heaven Gate, they have sealed the destinies of countless people for their own benefit. Since the birth of the Kanglan continent, countless heroes had tried their best, but only the senior from 8,000 years ago managed to break through the seal. The young man of the martial serendipity pavilion said with a flickering gaze. Only the person in the copper mirror managed to break through the seal? Qin Nan was slightly startled. He did not expect the mysterious woman in the copper mirror to be stronger than he had imagined. It seems like I'll have to walk a brighter path in the future. Qin Nan clenched his fists tightly without overthinking it. It felt like flames were flickering in his eyes. He was the owner of the divine battle spirit. He was in charge of his own destiny. By the way, Senior, do you remember Jiang Bailan? After Qin Nan calmed his thoughts, he immediately asked. Jiang Bailan? I remember her. She is very smart. Among the people I know, there are only a few who are as smart as her. The martial serendipity pavilion said. Senior Jiang Bailan, I have now turned into a death crystal, floating in the void. I am only one step away from death. When the time comes, I'll have to trouble you to keep an eye out. If you find any death crystals, please inform me. Qin Nan said in a deep voice. Now that his cultivation had reached the half-martial monarch realm, it would only take him half a year to achieve the martial monarch realm. Half a year might seem like a long time, but it was actually just a snap of a finger. Therefore, he had to find Jiang Bailan in advance. Once he succeeded in achieving the martial monarch realm, he would be able to use the primary monarch force to help her achieve her Tao. Death Crystal? The young man from the martial serendipity pavilion was shocked. With his knowledge, he understood many things in an instant. If Qin Nan managed to achieve the martial monarch realm and inserted the primary monarch force into the death crystal, Jiang Bailan would have a great chance of achieving the martial monarch realm on her own. With Jiang Bailan's intelligence, once she achieved the martial monarch realm on her own and helped Qin Nan, it would stir a great storm in the Kanglan continent. If that's the case, I'll look for it for you. The young man of the martial serendipity pavilion quickly collected his thoughts and said calmly. I'll leave it to Senior then. Qin Nan brought his fists together. I almost forgot to tell you, a peak martial progenitor realm beast with a decent bloodline visited your father in the lower district of the eastern continent. He gave your father and the people of the Qin clan a lot of precious gift. The young man of the martial serendipity pavilion said as a sudden thought crossed his mind. A beast with a decent bloodline? Qin Nan was startled, but he soon collected his thoughts. The beast must be Longhu. What a surprise, his cultivation has reached the peak martial progenitor realm too. A smile appeared on Qin Nan's face. He clearly remembered the huge bump on Longhu's forehead and the way he drooled while staring at the beautiful female cultivators on the street. Do you want to go back? Your father misses you a lot. The young man of the martial serendipity pavilion sharply noticed the change in Qin Nan's emotions and asked. That won't be necessary. Senior, thanks for your help. I'll be leaving first. Qin Nan shook his head and rose to his feet. He brought his fists together and left the martial serendipity pavilion. It was still not the right time yet. Once he achieved the martial monarch realm on his own, he would reunite with his old friends and return to the lower district of the eastern continent to meet his father with great glory. For now, he had to give it his all. However, little did Qin Nan know, after he left, a white figure with a terrifying aura appeared in the martial serendipity pavilion. The figure turned out to be the magical hair sword god. It turned out that he had not left. There are 5 ways to achieve the martial monarch realm. Why did you only give him 2? Besides, you already knew that he wouldn't choose to slaughter millions of cultivators, but the second way, right? The young man of the martial serendipity pavilion said with an indifferent smile. That's right, I want him to achieve the martial monarch realm on the Tao Origin Heavenly Mountain. The magical hair sword god said calmly. Why is that? The young man of the martial serendipity pavilion wore a confused look. Since ancient times, be it in the Kanglan continent or that place, the birth of a law-defying cultivator would require a grand occasion, with countless authorities as witnesses. If he were to use the first way, or the other three ways, even though he would be able to trigger the tribulation, in my opinion, something unexpected would happen, preventing him from achieving the martial monarch realm. This is the only way for Qin Nan to succeed. The magical hair sword god said calmly. That does make sense. The senior 8,000 years ago also initiated the Battle of the South Heaven Gate, which allowed him to break through the seal and ascend to the 9 heavens. The young man of the martial serendipity pavilion said thoughtfully. Of course, I'm going to make a huge move soon. When Qin Nan achieves the martial monarch realm, it'll be the day for me to swing my sword and turn the entire continent upside down. The magical hair sword god's eyes flickered with an imperious aura. Something huge? Could it be that you succeeded in persuading those old fellows? The young man of the martial serendipity pavilion was startled. Of course. The magical hair sword god nodded slightly. Damn, when I went to invite those old guys, I paid a huge price, but they weren't willing to accept it. Why are they willing to accept it when you're there? That's... The young man of the martial serendipity pavilion was left speechless. Let's not talk about that. Come with me, we'll meet the Tao Origin. The magical hair sword god disappeared with a kick. Sure. The young man of the martial serendipity pavilion performed a hand seal and fired a stream of his will into the rift. The pagoda disappeared too. At that instant, the cultivators were clueless. Ever since the great battle 15,000 years ago, the most terrifying storm in history had already begun to take shape, and it had begun to sweep across the land. End of chapter. Chapter 1275. Meanwhile, at the entrance of the wretched disaster forest. It's time to return to the Anti-Heaven Alliance to collect the debt. Qin Nan murmured as his lips curled upward into a cold grin. A few days ago, on his way to the wretched disaster forest from the Anti-Heaven Alliance, he had been chased by the martial monarch of the Dead Spirit tribe, the Thunder Rock monarch beast, martial monarch Nanjian, and more than 10 other martial monarchs. He did not believe it was a coincidence. It was most likely the doing of the illusionist martial monarch and his crew. If the sun and moon sword god had not accompanied him back then, he would not have been able to escape from this murderous intent. How could he not get his revenge? Following this, Qin Nan learned the location of the Anti-Heaven Alliance through the 7 luminaries' sword talisman. He immediately withdrew his aura and disappeared into the rift, heading toward the Anti-Heaven Alliance at a shocking pace. Time gradually passed. 2 days later, the 7 luminaries' flying sword, the Anti-Heaven Palace of the Anti-Heaven Alliance. Illusionist martial monarch, why are you in such a hurry? What happened? Following 2 strong monarch auras, martial monarch Mingkong and martial monarch Rongtian arrived with vigorous step. Their auras were a lot stronger than a few days ago. It was obvious that they had made some progress recently. 2 days ago, I received a report that Qin Nan had used the 7 luminaries' sword talisman to communicate with the Anti-Heaven Alliance. In other words, Qin Nan is still alive. The illusionist martial monarch said with a dark expression. Since he received the news 2 days ago, his good mood had completely vanished. Qin Nan is still alive? Martial monarch Mingkong and martial monarch Rongtian were startled. After they spread the news, even if the other martial monarchs did not make their moves, the South Heaven sacred ground would surely set up a trap. Under such circumstances, how could this Qin Nan still be alive? Perhaps Qin Nan is already dead, and the people of the South Heaven Sacred Ground are using the Seven Luminaries' sword talisman? Martial Monarch Rongtian said as a thought crossed his mind. There is a high possibility of that happening. The eyes of the illusionist Martial Monarch and Martial Monarch Minkong flickered. In the past, whenever a disciple of the Anti-Heaven Alliance was killed, the people of the South Heaven Sacred Ground would use the Seven Luminaries' sword talisman to communicate with the Anti-Heaven Alliance to learn their exact location, so they would send someone to investigate. Even though the South Heaven Sacred Ground had yet to discover the Seven Luminaries' flying sword, they had never stopped searching for it. I'm really sorry to disappoint the three of you. Right at this moment, a cold and indifferent voice resounded in the hall. At some point, a figure had appeared at the entrance of the Anti-Heaven Palace. It was none other than Qin Nan. After traveling for 2 days and 2 nights, Qin Nan returned to the Anti-Heaven Alliance. The first thing he did after returning was to the Anti-Heaven Palace, and he happened to hear the conversation. Qin Nan, the illusionist Martial Monarch Rongtian, and Martial Monarch Minkong shuddered. The hope that they had in their hearts was completely shattered at this moment. Such a powerful aura! Did his cultivation have a breakthrough recently? The eyes of the illusionist Martial Monarch and his crew widened when they saw Qin Nan. They realized that Qin Nan's aura had become extremely mysterious, like a black hole. Even with their cultivation, they were unable to peek into it. In addition to that, the current Qin Nan was emitting a faint pressure to them. Qin Nan would never be able to do this in the past. Fellow cultivators, your moves are impressive. If it weren't for my luck, I would have turned into a pile of bones by now, and no one would be able to discover it. Qin Nan glanced at the trio as he approached them with an expressionless face. His voice was filled with a hint of coldness. An invisible aura was being emitted from his body. It felt like the atmosphere in the Anti-Heaven Palace had frozen. Hall leader Qin Nan, I have no idea what you're talking about. After you left the Anti-Heaven Alliance, we left the Anti-Heaven Alliance too. The illusionist Martial Monarch soon calmed his thoughts. He sat on the jade chair and said with a fake smile, Qin Nan, what happened? If it's anything serious, feel free to tell us. We can discuss it together and settle it together. After all, the people of the Anti-Heaven Alliance won't be bullied by outsiders. Martial Monarch Rongtian and Martial Monarch Minkong were even more impressive. They pretended to be righteous. As martial monarchs, they were not idiots. Even though Qin Nan had guessed that they were the culprits, they had done a great job of cleaning up the mess. They did not leave any traces behind, thus Qin Nan was unable to find any evidence. As long as there was no evidence, they could simply deny it and pretend to be innocent. Qin Nan would not be able to do anything to them. Qin Nan's eyes flickered, but he was not too surprised. It was not the first time that these three were shameless. It was normal that they did not dare to admit what they had done. Qin Nan, I have to say, you've really surprised us. How about this, if you apologize to us, we'll pretend it never happened. We won't take the heavenly arcana immortal fruits either. If you continue to fight with us, you won't get any benefits either. This chapter is not finished, please turn the page, not a single bit of benefit. Even though you're very strong now, which we're quite impressed by, you should know that no matter how strong you are, you're only a martial ancestor, while we're martial monarchs. The illusionist Martial Monarch said after a slight pause. That's true. Apologize to us with a bow, and we'll let bygones be bygones. Martial Monarch Rongtian and Martial Monarch Minkong's eyes flickered as they voiced their agreement. After spending so much time with the illusionist Martial Monarch, they were able to see through his thoughts. Qin Nan's current strength was extremely powerful, and the three of them were no match against him. In order to prevent Qin Nan from messing with them during this period of time, it was better to let the matter rest for now, and wait until their cultivations were stronger before they came back to trouble Qin Nan. You want me to apologize? Can you be any more shameless? Qin Nan almost burst out laughing when he heard the words. The shamelessness of the trio had greatly exceeded his imagination. They had been picking on him since the beginning. Now that they were planning to back off, they even wanted him to apologize? How ridiculous! You're still unwilling? The illusionist Martial Monarch Minkong, and Martial Monarch Rongtian's expressions instantly turned cold. They were three martial monarchs, yet they were asking a martial ancestor to apologize to them. They were clearly letting him off easy. If you're unwilling, there's nothing more to say. However, it doesn't matter if you know the truth. You have no proof, so you can't do anything to us. The illusionist Martial Monarch and the others spoke with disdain in their eyes. Even though they had no intention of picking a fight with Qin Nan, they were martial monarchs with the authority of martial monarch. Since Qin Nan had rejected their offer, they had no reason to hesitate any further. Is that so? Qin Nan's eyes instantly turned cold. A murderous aura burst out from his body, causing the temperature of the surroundings to drop rapidly. What now? You still want to fight me? Ha ha ha, if you have the guts, why don't you do it today? The illusionist Martial Monarch and the others burst out laughing instead of showing any sign of fear. There was a rule in the Anti-Heaven Alliance that forbade violence. They would not believe Qin Nan had the guts to do so. However, before they could finish their words, a terrifying aura burst out from the palace. I'll grant you your wish. Following a thunderous roar, Qin Nan's figure sprang toward the trio like a ray of light. End of chapter. Chapter 1276. Qin Nan, you really dare to attack. The illusionist Martial Monarch Rongtian, and Martial Monarch Minkong were astounded seeing this. Was this Qin Nan out of his mind? However, the only response they received was Qin Nan's punch. As Qin Nan threw the punch, a terrifying pressure surged forward like three ancient immortal mountains crushing downward. The illusionist Martial Monarch Rongtian, and Martial Monarch Minkong were greatly alarmed, causing their expressions to change greatly. Illusionist Rongtian. The three did not have time to say anything. They immediately performed hand seals and unleashed their monarch auras to defend themselves against the punch. At that instant, a terrifying explosion took place in the Anti-Heaven Palace. Outside the Anti-Heaven Palace, the cultivators in the Star-Aligning Palace, the Mystic Treasure Palace, etc. were startled. They immediately glanced toward the Anti-Heaven Palace and unleashed their divine sense. Their eyes were filled with astonishment. The reason being that no one had expected someone to attack in the Anti-Heaven Palace. What kind of power is that? The hearts of the illusionist Martial Monarch and his crew were filled with great astonishment. In just a few breaths' time, they could sense that Qin Nan's cultivation was like a magnificent ocean with a boundless force. Even the monarch force in their bodies was no match against it. They even had a feeling that if the battle continued, they would be completely suppressed in less than the period it took 3 incense sticks to burn. Qin Nan, what are you waiting for? At that instant, a thunderous roar exploded in the Anti-Heaven Palace. A figure appeared, who was none other than the Sun and Moon Sword God. Greetings, Senior Sword God. Qin Nan came to a stop upon seeing this. He withdrew his power and aura. Senior Sword God, Qin Nan attacked us in the Anti-Heaven Palace without any hesitation. He's trying to kill us. He has no respect for the rules of the Anti-Heaven Alliance. The illusionist Martial Monarch and the other two said at the same time while laughing coldly in their hearts. Although they didn't know why Qin Nan had become so powerful, they knew that the Sun and Moon Sword God would take care of Qin Nan for his recklessness this time. Qin Nan, do you admit your mistake? The Sun and Moon Sword God asked in annoyance. This Qin Nan was being too reckless. Did he really think he could break the rules of the Anti-Heaven Alliance as he pleased after achieving the Martial Monarch realm? Besides, if there was anything that needed to be done to deal with the three of them, wouldn't it be fine to just let him know? Senior Sword God, it's my fault for breaking the rules of the Anti-Heaven Alliance. However, the illusionist Martial Monarch and his crew had leaked my whereabouts, which led to the pursuit of more than 10 Martial Monarchs. I couldn't help but make my move. Qin Nan said slowly with a calm expression. The Sun and Moon Sword God raised his eyebrows and his expression softened. Before he came here, he had completely forgotten about the matter of being hunted down. Senior Sword God, we have no idea what Qin Nan is talking about. After Qin Nan left the Anti-Heaven Alliance, we left too. Besides, more than 10 Martial Monarchs were chasing after him? Is that even possible? The illusionist Martial Monarch and his crew uttered hollow laugh. This Qin Nan was such an idiot, trying to come up with a better excuse. If more than 10 Martial Monarchs were chasing after him, how could Qin Nan still be alive? It's true that more than 10 Martial Monarchs were chasing after him, as I was the one that accompanied Qin Nan to the wretched disaster forest. The Sun and Moon Sword God said coldly. You were the one that accompanied him? The smiles on the faces of the illusionist Martial Monarch and his crew instantly froze as their eyes widened. They never thought the Sun and Moon Sword God would be the one to accompany Qin Nan to the wretched disaster forest. The people chasing after him are the Martial Monarchs of the Dead Spirit tribe, the Martial Monarchs of the Beast tribe, Martial Monarch Nanjian of the South Heaven Sacred Ground, etc. It's not a coincidence. You must be behind it, right? The Sun and Moon Sword God asked expressionlessly. An invisible aura slowly spread out from his body, causing the space in the hall to freeze. The illusionist Martial Monarch and his crew shuddered. Cold sweat began to roll down their foreheads. If Qin Nan was able to guess that they were the culprits, how could the Sun and Moon Sword God not know the truth? No way, we can't admit to it. The illusionist Martial Monarch and his crew took a deep breath. They exchanged glances with one another and came to a consensus. That's enough, there's no need to think about how to deal with me. I don't have any evidence, but the truth was something that everyone was well aware of. You might be able to escape death, but you won't be punished. Qin Nan, what do you think? The Sun and Moon Sword God said calmly. Lord Sword God is right. If the three of you can drink this cup of wine, then I won't care about anything else. Of course, in this cup of wine there is my martial will. Qin Nan nodded. With a flick, 3 cups of wine appeared before the illusionist Martial Monarch and his crew. Each cup was emitting a strong presence of qi, which was no different from ordinary wine. It was impossible for him to kill the illusionist Martial Monarch and his crew in the Anti-Heaven Alliance. Even though Qin Nan was highly regarded by the Magical Hair Sword God and the others in the Anti-Heaven Alliance, Qin Nan would not break the rules on his own accord. He had purposely interfered to lure the Sun and Moon Sword God here so that he could serve justice. The Sun and Moon Sword God was left speechless upon seeing this. You only need to teach them a lesson, yet you let them drink the wine that contains your cultivation will? If they were to drink the wine, they would be severely injured for at least half a year. They would need countless resources to treat their injuries. However, before the Sun and Moon Sword God could stop him. You only need to drink 3 cups of wine? We'll drink them. The illusionist Martial Monarch Rongtian, and Martial Monarch Mingkong blurted out in joy. They did not expect that a single cup of wine would be enough to put an end to everything. They had already inspected the wine with their divine sense and eye technique. The wine was extremely ordinary. There was nothing special about it. Besides, with the Sun and Moon Sword God here, no matter how bold Qin Nan was, he would not dare to poison the wine. As for Qin Nan's cultivation will? What a joke! Why would the 3 Martial Monarchs be afraid of Qin Nan's cultivation will? As if they were worried that Qin Nan would go back on his words, The illusionist martial monarch and his crew picked up a cup of wine and emptied it. Qin Nan, oh Qin Nan, once this is over, once our cultivation improves, we won't let you go so easily. The trio murmured coldly in their hearts. They could easily guess that the reason why Qin Nan was able to make the sun and moon sword god accompany him was because he had spent some contribution points. They did not expect this at all. It was their loss. However, the illusionist martial monarch and his crew were startled as they became aware of something. End of chapter. Chapter 1277. To think that this wine actually contains such a powerful martial will. The illusionist martial monarch Rongtian, and martial monarch Mingkong exclaimed in their hearts. They were slightly surprised. However, their eyes soon flickered with disdain. In front of martial monarchs, the little bit of cultivation will was nothing worth mentioning. Suppress it! The illusionist martial monarch and the others uttered a roar in their hearts. The monarch hearts in their bodies began to beat rapidly as three shocking wills burst out from their bodies, suppressing the will of the divine god of battle in their bodies. In the nick of time, an unexpected change took place. The will of the divine god of battle grew rapidly, as if it was strengthened by some force. Within a breath's time, it had turned into a dragon of the divine god of battle with a tremendous aura. This is... The figures of the illusionist martial monarch and the others stiffened. Why did the will of the divine god of battle become so terrifying all of a sudden? Before they could react, the will of the divine god of battle that had been growing rapidly began to move like a godly dragon emerging from the ocean. It let out a roar and shattered their wills into pieces. The remaining will of the divine god of battle slammed into their minds. Crap! The illusionist martial monarch and his crew were startled. They immediately executed various obscure monarch arts to protect their minds. However, these powerful monarch arts were like mere ants before the terrifying will of the divine god of battle. They were instantly shattered into pieces, while the remaining will of the divine god of battle slammed into their minds without any mercy. At that instant, the illusionist martial monarch and his crew were knocked backward as if they had just been struck by a deity. They uttered cries of agony as their monarch flesh was torn apart, causing blood to pour out from the wounds. In addition to that, the will of the divine god of battle was extremely condensed. It did not disperse after the first attack, but continued to attack like a torrential downpour. The entire hall was filled with cries of agony. If the other martial monarchs and elders of the Anti-Heaven Alliance were here, they would not dare to believe the sight before them. The three martial monarchs were like a group of three. The three martial monarchs of the divine god of battle were being beaten up miserably like ordinary people. You brought this upon yourselves. The sun and moon sword god shrugged. He initially wanted to stop them, but they had underestimated Qin Nan's strength. Qin Nan's cultivation was equivalent to the sixth-layer martial monarch realm. His will, in particular, was the combination of two Dao patterns. It was most likely that no martial monarch in the world could match it. I don't have any evidence this time. I'm just teaching you a little lesson. Next time, if you still don't know what's good for you, then don't blame me for disregarding our relationship as fellow disciples and starting a massacre. Qin Nan glanced down at the three with a cold gaze and a murderous aura. You! The illusionist martial monarch Rongtian, and martial monarch Mingkong were crying out in agony. Their eyes flickered with fear and a hint of regret. Even though they were martial monarchs, they were still terrified after being defeated by Qin Nan time and time again. Besides, if they knew this was going to happen, they would never drink the wine even if they were given 10 gut. How noisy! Go back and treat your wounds. The sun and moon sword god frowned when he heard the cries of agony. He waved his hand and fired 3 streams of sword intent, which encapsulated the trio and made them vanish into thin air. Qin Nan, I was going to look for you as soon as you came back, but I didn't expect you to cause so much trouble as soon as you came back. The Sun and Moon Sword God turned to Qin Nan and said with an indifferent smile. Cough cough, Senior, why are you looking for me? The murderous aura on Qin Nan's figure dissipated. He immediately switched the topic with an embarrassed look. First of all, take a good look at this scroll. The Sun and Moon Sword God flicked his finger and fired a scroll into Qin Nan's hand. Even though you have yet to achieve the martial monarch realm on your own, you have reached the level of the martial monarchs of the Kanglan continent. This scroll contains the information about the 2,500 martial monarchs on the god ranking. The Sun and Moon Sword God said calmly. 2,500 martial monarchs on the god ranking? Qin Nan's eyes flickered with excitement. He had only met a few martial monarchs in the half-god region since he had arrived. He had finally reached the level of the martial monarch realm. In this world, he would be able to meet all the authorities of the Kanglan continent. Second of all, this key, you should refine it when you get back. The Sun and Moon Sword God flipped his hand and took out an ancient, bronze-colored key covered in countless runes. What key is this? Qin Nan scanned the key with his left eye. His eyes flickered with astonishment. This was because he discovered that the ancient key actually contained a trace of divine aura that was faintly discernible. Once you refine this key, you'll be able to head to the abstruse god space that only martial monarchs can enter. I won't go into the details. Everything about the abstruse god space is recorded in the scroll. Anyway, you should train yourself in the abstruse god space for half a year before you achieve the martial monarch realm, to prepare yourself for the martial god realm. The Sun and Moon Sword God said calmly. Abstruse god space? Martial god realm? Qin Nan's heart shuddered. He did not expect that he would have to prepare himself for the martial god realm as soon as he achieved the martial monarch realm. The God Horoscope Contest is basically held once every 500 years. It's been 492 years since the last God Conferment battle. I estimate that the God Horoscope Contest will be held in the next 8 to 10 years. Half a year from now, before the Sun and Moon Sword God could finish, an imperious voice suddenly traveled across the rift and echoed in the Sun and Moon Sword God's mind. That was quick. I have something to attend to, I'll be leaving first. The Sun and Moon Sword God murmured. His eyes flickered as he said to Qin Nan before vanishing into thin air with a kick. What happened? Why is Senior in such a hurry? Why did he only finish half the sentence? Qin Nan was slightly startled seeing this. In his impression, the Sun and Moon Sword God had always been calm and collected. Forget it. Let's not think about it for now. I'll go back and check the scroll. Qin Nan shook his head and returned to his residence with a flicker. After setting up a forbidding aura and sitting down with his legs crossed, Qin Nan immediately checked the scroll with his divine sense. At that moment, not only had Qin Nan's strength, his vision had also reached the level of the martial monarch realm, allowing him to truly enter the world of martial monarchs. End of chapter. Chapter 1278. As soon as he inserted his finger into the scroll, names and words began to appear on it. Martial Monarch Rongtian, rank 2482nd, disciple of the magical hair sword god. Demoness Martial Monarch, ranked 2481st, core disciple of the Jade Lake Sacred Ground. Illusionist Martial Monarch, ranked 2396th. Thunder Rock Monarch Beast, ranked 2395th. Martial Monarch Sun Yang, ranked 2332nd. As Qin Nan browsed through the list, he saw several familiar names. Qin Nan smacked his lips. He did not expect Martial Monarch Rongtian, the illusionist Martial Monarch, the Thunder Rock Monarch Beast, and the rest of the martial monarchs in the half-god region to be ranked at the bottom. Qin Nan soon withdrew his thoughts and continued reading. Just like that, he spent a full 2 hours looking at it. During this period, he saw several names of martial monarchs, most of whom were from the 8 ancient tribes, the 6 great forbidden grounds, and the 3 great factions. Some of the martial monarchs even had descriptions of their lives beside their names. Just a few words were enough to describe their magnificent lives, causing Qin Nan to look forward to them. Why can't I see Dragon Emperor and the others, or Tang Qingshan and the others? Besides, the monarch ranking stopped at the 11th rank. There aren't any names in the top 10. Qin Nan soon realized that something was not right, causing him to frown. There are 2 lines here, the top 10 Emperor Wu ranking, and the Genius Emperor Wu ranking? Qin Nan was startled after taking a glimpse. He did not expect the God ranking to have a ranking within a ranking. Interesting, let's take a look at the top 10 Emperor Wu ranking. Qin Nan's lips curled upward as he scanned the list with his divine sense. He immediately came to a realization after taking a glimpse. Since there had never been a truly invincible great emperor, the God ranking did not have a top 10 ranking. Instead, it had the 10 Emperor Wu, which were the Dragon Emperor, the Black-Eyed Great Emperor, and the rest of the Great Emperors. Let's take a look at the Genius Emperor Wu list. Qin Nan shifted his divine sense. The so-called invincible genius ranking refers to the geniuses who have achieved the martial monarch realm within 1,000 years and possess great potential. There were a total of 50 people. If they died, others would replace them. This chapter is not finished. Please turn the page. First place, Xing Tianjing, 4th layer Great Monarch. Ranked 2nd, Zhuang Cidao, 4th layer Great Monarch. Ranked 3rd, Su Qingning, 3rd layer Great Monarch. Ranked 4th, the names of the 50 geniuses Emperor Wu were listed in order. Among them, Tang Qingshan was ranked 16th while Ao Tsangtian was ranked 42nd. Their cultivation bases were at the 2nd layer of the Great Monarch realm. It seems like senior brother Tang Qingshan has had some fortunate encounters after coming to the half-god region, allowing his cultivation to improve to such a level. That being said, this Xing Tianjing, Zhuang Cidao, and Su Qingning are indeed impressive. Their cultivation has improved to the 4th layer martial monarch realm in less than 2 months. A wisp of flames flickered in Qin Nan's eyes. All over his body, his blood began to boil slowly. The more powerful and heaven-defying Xing Tianjing, Zhuang Cidao and Su Qingning were, the more excited he was. I hope you will be able to fight me when I achieve the martial monarch realm. Qin Nan clenched his fists tightly, resulting in cracking noises. Phew, I think I've learned a lot about the martial monarchs in the half-god region. Let's take a look at this abstruse god space, and see if it's related to me achieving the martial monarch realm. Qin Nan exhaled deeply. He withdrew the battle intent in his heart and scanned the scroll with his divine sense. At the bottom of the scroll was a forbidding aura. After breaking it, he saw lines of ancient words. This is... Qin Nan's eyes flickered with astonishment as he took a glimpse. These lines of ancient words seemed to have an invisible attractive force that attracted his attention, causing him to continue reading. Time gradually passed. An hour later, Qin Nan finally finished reading the scroll. The astonishment in his eyes grew stronger. Who would have thought this abstruse god space is something like this? Qin Nan took a deep breath to calm his thoughts. The abstruse god space was an illusionary space that had been created 15,000 years ago. Only martial monarchs with cultivation and ancient keys were allowed to enter it. That being said, until now, no one knew why the abstruse god space was created. The only thing they knew was that the abstruse god space had an ancient and mysterious presence. It was none other than the abstruse god pieces. Until now, no one knew what the abstruse god pieces were used for. The only thing they were clear about was that once one obtained 999 abstruse god pieces, one would be able to attract the god horoscopes when participating in the god horoscope contest, allowing one to inherit the god horoscope and achieve the martial god realm. In the past, 36 martial monarchs had obtained 999 abstruse god pieces, and half of them had successfully achieved the martial god realm, shocking the entire Kanglan continent. This was also the reason why the Sun and Moon Sword God had asked Qin Nan to train in the abstruse god space. Besides, this abstruse god space is very suitable for me. Qin Nan's eyes flickered. The reason being that the monarch ranking, god ranking, and South Heaven Gate were unable to interfere with the abstruse god space. That was only the first reason. Secondly, the flesh of martial monarchs was unable to enter the space. Only their will could enter it. Once they entered the space, their cultivation, martial spirit, monarch arts, and will would be concealed. In simpler words, even if the illusionary martial monarch and Qin Nan stumbled into each other in the abstruse god space, they would not know each other. Everyone knew that it was best for Qin Nan not to expose his cultivation. Otherwise, it would bring him great danger. However, this was no longer a problem in the abstruse god space. In at most 10 years, the god horoscope contest will take place. Half a year later, if I manage to achieve the martial monarch realm on my own, it would surely shock the entire Kanglan continent. By then, the god ranking would most likely stop me from taking part in the god horoscope contest. Qin Nan squinted. The Sun and Moon Sword God was right. He had to prepare himself in advance. He could not afford to wait until the god horoscope contest actually took place before coming up with a plan. The reason being that achieving the martial god realm was extremely important to him. Achieving the martial monarch realm on his own was not enough to shake the South Heaven Gate. Only by achieving the martial god realm and becoming one of the strongest experts in the Kanglan continent would he have the power to shatter the South Heaven Gate. Divine God of Battle, I won't make you wait too long. Having this thought, Qin Nan mumbled to himself. He exhaled deeply and took out the ancient key. He had only learned the basics of the abstruse god space. Thus he was still clueless about the details. Therefore, it was time to take a look inside. End of chapter. Chapter 1279. Martial Will, Merge with the Core. Qin Nan groaned as the monarch heart in his body began to beat rapidly. The terrifying battle god destruction monarch intent was awakened too. It spread into the surroundings, causing the entire palace to tremble vigorously, like an ancient ferocious beast crawling on the ground and trembling in fear. Qin Nan's eyes flickered sharply. He quickly raised his hand and gathered his martial will. He flicked his finger and inserted it into the ancient key. Buzz. The deathly still ancient key immediately emitted a chaotic aura. A mysterious glow was emitted from the top of the key, which encapsulated Qin Nan's figure like the giant hand of an ancient deity reaching out, encapsulating his figure. At that instant, a heavy feeling surged into Qin Nan's mind. It felt like a terrifying force was pulling his soul that was gradually falling asleep and bringing him to a mysterious world. Time gradually passed. After some time, Qin Nan gradually woke up from his deep sleep. My body is formed by my martial will? Qin Nan sharply sensed that something was not right. He extended his divine sense and exclaimed after taking a glimpse. Being able to transform a martial monarch's martial will into the martial monarch's flesh, which was exactly the same as the martial monarch's, was utterly terrifying. This place must be ancient city Taya? Qin Nan withdrew his thoughts and glanced at his surroundings. He immediately discovered that he was currently in a dark, ancient city. There were 15 auras of martial monarchs scattered around the city. The city was ancient city Taya. Qin Nan had read about it in the introduction of the scroll before. It was the only city in the entire abstruse god space. Similarly, every martial monarch would land in the city when they entered the place. It's been a month since the last time I achieved the martial monarch realm. You're only here now? At that instant, a hoarse voice echoed in Qin Nan's ears. Who are you? Qin Nan's expression changed as his body tensed up. The Emperor Qi in his body began to circulate rapidly. You know, right now. His cultivation was equivalent to the 6th layer martial monarch realm, and his cultivation will was extremely terrifying. It was impossible for martial monarchs below the 8th layer martial monarch realm to approach him secretly. Hee, you can call me Old Man Taya. Following a hoarse laugh, an old man with white hair and 4 deep grooves on his face wearing a linen robe slowly walked out from the side. He was not emitting any aura from his body. Old Man Taya? Qin Nan was slightly taken aback. He had read from the scroll that the so-called Old Man Taya was actually the weapon spirit of ancient city Taya, who was in charge of welcoming the martial monarchs who had just entered the city for the first time. Meanwhile, they could also trade the abstruse god pieces for various things. This is your identity medallion. Give me a Taoist name, Old Man Taya said. His skinny hand handed over a strange, dark red token. The suspicion in Qin Nan's heart vanished when he saw the medallion. In the abstruse god space, only Old Man Taya had such a unique identity medallion. Thank you, Senior. Qin Nan brought his fists together and flicked his finger, firing a stream of monarch force. The words Duan Qing immediately appeared on the medallion. It was the rule of the abstruse god space. Every martial monarch had to give themselves a Taoist name. That being said, the martial monarchs had always given themselves a different name instead of using their real name. In ancient city Taya, there's a Taya ranking, which records the martial monarchs who have come here. They are ranked according to the number of abstruse god pieces they have. The day before the god horoscope contest, the person with the most pieces will be ranked first, and receive the mysterious reward of ancient city Taya. This scroll is the Taya ranking. Every martial monarch in the abstruse god space is listed on it, including you. Old Man Taya handed over another dark gold jade slip. The Taya ranking? Qin Nan's eyes flickered when he heard this. He quickly scanned the scroll with his divine sense. He was quite curious to see how many abstruse god pieces the martial monarchs had obtained in the abstruse god space. However, as soon as his divine sense entered the scroll, it was blocked by a terrifying force. Even if it was him, he wouldn't be able to break it by force. I forgot to mention, you'll need an abstruse god piece to check the scroll. Besides, if you need any monarch arts, monarch weapons, or maps of the abstruse god space, you can trade them with the abstruse god pieces. As Old Man Taya said those words, he squeezed out a smile on his shriveled face. The 4 gullies on his face also curved upward. Even that requires abstruse god pieces. Qin Nan was left speechless. However, if I have enough abstruse god pieces in the future, I can trade them for maps. Qin Nan murmured. According to the scroll, the abstruse god space was boundless. No one had ever reached its end. If he had a detailed map, it would be a lot easier to acquire the abstruse god pieces. Senior, I'll be leaving first. Qin Nan brought his fists together, and was about to leave to take a look at the abstruse god space. Wait, there's one more thing I should tell you. The abstruse god space is split into 2 different realms. The Heaven Abyss. The Heaven Realm has more abstruse god pieces and more fortunate encounters. The Abyss Realm, on the other hand, has fewer opportunities. However, the Heaven Realm is filled with 6th-layer martial monarchs and peak martial monarch. If you were to trespass the Heaven Realm, you would be in great danger if the other martial monarchs found you. Old Man Taya's eyes became deep as he spoke. Heaven Realm, Abyss Realm? The difference between the Heaven and Abyss realms. Qin Nan squinted. The abstruse god space was a lot more interesting than he had imagined. Senior, you have my thanks. Qin Nan shook his head and stopped overthinking. He brought his fists together at Old Man Taya and expressed his gratitude. With a kick, he flew toward the entrance of the ancient city. Not long after, he flew out of ancient city Taya and landed on the ground ahead. Old Man Taya stared at Qin Nan's back as he left. He finally turned around when he could no longer see Qin Nan's figure. He began to murmur as he headed toward the other parts of the ancient city. If anyone was close to him, they would be able to hear his murmur. Monarch ranking, God ranking, South Heaven Gate. South Heaven Gate, God ranking, Monarch ranking. Monarch ranking, God ranking. The murmur was repeated over and over again. End of chapter. Chapter 1280. After leaving ancient city Taya, Qin Nan's eyes flickered with astonishment upon seeing the sight before him. The sky was eerily dark red. Instead of qi descending from the rift, it was filled with wisps of cultivation intent. That was not all. On this vast and boundless land, the many trees, flowers, as well as rocks and other things were all formed from martial will. I don't have a map with me, so I'll have to search around. Qin Nan calmed his thoughts and made up his mind before flying into the sky. As the saying went, the beginning of everything was the hardest. The time when one first entered the abstruse god space was the dullest and most confusing. Only after obtaining a certain amount of abstruse god pieces would the place become lively. Time gradually passed. 8 hours were gone in the blink of an eye. In the past 8 hours, Qin Nan had entered several mountains and forests to search for his treasures. He even stumbled into many ferocious beasts and puppets formed by cultivation intent and powerful forbidding auras. However, he still did not find any abstruse god pieces. He only found some rare materials. Is that? Deep inside a mountain, Qin Nan suddenly came to a stop. Through his left eye of the divine god of battle, he could see a pitch-black swamp deep inside the woods, where a third-layer martial monarch realm beast resided. Beside the beast was a rock around the size of a palm engulfed in flames, which contained a mystical aura. I've finally found an abstruse god piece. Qin Nan's eyes flickered. Without wasting any time, he stomped his foot and unleashed his aura, causing the entire mountain to tremble vigorously. Bold human, you dare trespass into my territory. The terrifying beast deep inside the swamp was awakened instantly, as its eyes were filled with raging flames. It raised its giant claw and slapped forward, emitting a terrifying force in Qin Nan's direction. Slash! Qin Nan waved his hand and fired a terrifying saber intent into the sky, tearing the force apart with brute force. The remaining saber intent collapsed on its own, turning into thousands of tiny saber intents that collided with the beast's body. Asterisk whoosh. Asterisk Qin Nan took hold of the opportunity and landed beside the beast with a kick. He reached out his hand and grabbed the abstruse god piece. Trying to take the abstruse god piece? Not on my watch. The terrifying beast's expression instantly became twisted. Its body emitted a blinding glow, as if there was a shocking ancient formation inside its body that was activated rapidly. This terrifying demonic beast actually wanted to self-destruct. Even though the third-layer martial monarch realm beast was no match against Qin Nan, the force of its self-detonation would still inflict a great impact on Qin Nan. Break! Qin Nan remained calm. With a kick, his figure leapt into the air as a terrifying destruction will was accumulated on his fingertip. With a flick, the destruction will penetrated the beast's body like a godly sword. Ha ha ha, my body is made up of my cultivation intent. It's useless even if you've penetrated my body. Now die with me. The beast burst out laughing. However, before it could finish its words, its expression suddenly stiffened. The reason being that the powerful intent that had penetrated its body had exploded, turning into an ocean of intent that devoured the core of the ancient formation inside its body. In the blink of an eye, the blinding light and the terrifying aura that it was emitting dissipated. Even its body began to crumble. It turned out that the terrifying beast was only able to unleash the strength of the third-layer martial monarch realm and detonate itself because of the ancient formation inside its body. Once the formation was destroyed, the beast would collapse on its own. The abstruse god pieces in this abstruse god space aren't that easy to get. Qin Nan's eyes glittered. He did not expect the beast to detonate itself before he made his move. If he had not reacted in time to see through the formation inside the beast's body, he would have been injured by the explosion. Cultivator in the distance, there's no need to hide anymore, right? Qin Nan withdrew his gaze and said calmly as he turned his head toward the distance. During the battle, he had already noticed an extra person in the woods in the distance. He was a third-layer martial monarch. Haha, cultivator, your eye technique is impressive indeed. You're only a first-layer martial monarch, yet you're able to see through the formation inside the beast's body and discover my presence. Following a burst of laughter, a figure flew toward him from the woods. Even though Qin Nan could not see the person's face clearly, he could roughly tell that he was a middle-aged man based on the voice. Since your cultivation is quite impressive, I won't trouble you further. Give me the abstruse god pieces and you may leave. The figure stood firmly while emitting a formidable aura, which felt like an ancient giant, causing one to feel intimidated. If Qin Nan was able to see through the man's appearance, he would see a grin on the man's face. The reason being that in his opinion, it was already reasonable for Qin Nan to hand over the abstruse god pieces. If he were to stumble into other martial monarchs, he might even ask him to hand over the natural resources and monarch art. Among the martial monarchs, the strong preyed on the weak. Sorry, I'm not giving them to you. Qin Nan rejected the offer straight away. He did not want to waste any more time and flew forward. You! When the figure saw this, his face froze up. He did not expect Qin Nan to reject his offer. Not only that, Qin Nan had even turned around and left. It was obvious that he was not putting him in his eyes. A mere first-layer martial monarch dared to treat him with such an attitude. Well, you're more hot-tempered than the ones I've met before, but I'll teach you today that being hot-tempered isn't necessarily a good thing. The voice of the figure turned icy as he performed a monarch seal with his hands. Snowflakes began to appear from the rift in all directions. Each snowflake was like a giant icy sword, which descended in Qin Nan's direction. The attack was one of the figure's powerful monarch arts, the icy domain. Whenever it was executed, the snowflakes would spread continuously and seal off the surroundings, leaving no way to escape. Even a second-layer martial monarch would not stand a chance against it. Is that so? Qin Nan's eyes turned cold. Since the man had offered himself to him, he would not show any mercy. End of chapter. Chapter 1281. Will of Destruction. Qin Nan turned around and unleashed streams of the will of destruction with a thought. They circled his figure like swimming dragons and shattered the snowflakes falling from the sky into pieces. Is this the difference between a self-achieved martial monarch and an ordinary martial monarch? The will of destruction that I unleashed is only equivalent to the third-layer martial monarch realm, but it can easily shatter his monarch art. Qin Nan's lips curled upward seeing this. It was his first time fighting against another martial monarch since he had self-achieved the martial monarch realm. As such, he did not use his full strength as he wanted to test his strength. The outcome did not disappoint him. The self-achieved martial monarch realm was incomparable to a fake martial monarch realm cultivator. I didn't expect you to be able to execute such a powerful monarch art with your mere cultivation of the first layer martial monarch realm. However, if I'm not mistaken, this is all you've got, right? The figure soon calmed down after a brief moment of astonishment. His eyes flickered with disdain. In his opinion, the person before him was nothing more than using all of his strength to launch his strongest attack in order to intimidate him. First layer martial monarch realm, either way, it was only the first layer martial monarch realm. Now, I'll let you know that even among the martial monarchs there are different levels. The frosty wind of the heavens and earth, the seal of ice and snow. The figure uttered a roar and performed a hand seal. At that instant, the snowflakes drifting in the air began to gather toward him as wisps of godly glows were unleashed. The attack he was executing was stronger than the icy domain from before. He was planning to inflict serious damage on Qin Nan with a single blow. Shut up! However, before he could finish his sentence, before he could execute his killing move, a thunderous roar exploded in the air. Bang! A terrifying will burst out from Qin Nan's figure, causing the snowflakes drifting in the air to come to a stop. The woods below began to tremble vigorously. If Qin Nan was only an ordinary human before, the current Qin Nan was an ancient titan, the god of battle among the titans. The figure subconsciously backed away. His eyes were filled with terror, as he completely forgot about the monarch seal that he was in the middle of performing. As a martial monarch, he would not let it go so easily. This chapter does not end, please turn the page. I am completely frightened. However, he never thought that the person who was only a first-layer martial monarch in his eyes would unleash such a terrifying aura in the blink of an eye. The person before him was at least a fifth-layer martial monarch realm cultivator, right? He was challenging a fifth-layer martial monarch? Run! Without hesitation, the figure uttered a roar and performed a hand seal. Streams of ice spread out from its back, as if it was trying to form a pair of ancient ice wings. Trying to escape? Qin Nan took a step forward with an expressionless face. A terrifying saber intent burst out from his body and spread into the surroundings, turning the area within a few li into a saber intent space. The figure shuddered as his scalp went numb. He didn't dare to continue forming the hand seal because he felt a great sense of danger in his heart. He also had a strong intuition that he wouldn't be able to escape now. Senior Duanqing, please stay your hand. If you're willing to let me go, I'll give you all 7 abstruse god pieces. The figure immediately made up his mind and blurted out. Even though his actual body would not die if he was killed in the abstruse god space, his actual body would be greatly affected due to the destruction of his cultivation will. He would need to spend a certain amount of time and resources to recover from the damage. As such, it was better for him to hand over the abstruse god pieces. After all, 7 abstruse god pieces were not a lot. 7 abstruse god pieces? Qin Nan's eyes flickered as he withdrew the saber intent emitting from his body. It seemed that in the beginning, if one wanted to accumulate wealth quickly, it was indeed the most convenient way to rely on robbing and robbing. Hang on, how do you know my name is Duanqing? Qin Nan frowned slightly. His identity scroll had always been stored in his sumer ring. Normally, the man would not know his Dao name. In the abstruse god space, you can buy a precious material called Heaven's Eye Liquid from Old Mantea with 5 abstruse god pieces. After refining it, you'll be able to see your Dao name. Senior Duanqing, I've robbed a martial monarch 2 days ago and found a drop of Heaven's Eye Liquid. I'll give it to you along with the 7 abstruse god pieces, and we'll let bygones be bygones. How does that sound? The figure flipped his hand and stood up. He then took out a jade bottle and 7 pieces of xianshan fragment. Even though it was quite painful for him, he had no choice but to sacrifice himself for his own safety. Why was he so unlucky to stumble into a fifth-layer martial monarch who was pretending to be weak? Qin Nan nodded. He waved his hand and stored the 7 abstruse god pieces into his bag. He also refined the Heaven's Eye liquid inside the jade jar. After refining the Heaven's Eye liquid, Qin Nan glanced at the figure again and saw the words Lingyu floating on his chest. Cultivator Lingyu, a piece of advice: you should stop robbing people. Qin Nan withdrew his saber intent and prepared to leave after saying this. Cough cough, Senior Duanqing, I have a map here. Are you interested in working with me? Ling Yu's eyes flickered as he spoke after a slight hesitation. He had been to the place on the map before, but with his current cultivation, it was impossible for him to retrieve the treasures inside. However, it would be a lot easier with the help of the man before him. That being said, Ling Yu had only extended the invitation after seeing that Qin Nan had kept his promise and would not harm him again. After all, in the abstruse god space, many martial monarchs would turn hostile after acquiring the abstruse god pieces, as they would want more benefits. Work with me? Qin Nan halted in his tracks. That's right, I'll bring you there, and you'll be responsible for the loot. We'll split it 6-4. Of course, to prevent any accidents from happening, both of us will have to swear an oath. Lingyu said slowly. Why are you asking me to work with you? Aren't you afraid that I'll rob you and go there myself? Qin Nan said with a calm smile instead of accepting the offer right away. Even if you're going to attack me, I won't hand over the map. After all, I've already spent 30 abstruse god pieces to buy the map. I'll just have to cultivate again after my cultivation will is shattered. Ling Yu met Qin Nan's gaze with a calm expression. I see, we can work together, but I'll have to split it 7-3. Qin Nan nodded after a slight ponder. He did not have any targets in mind, thus it did not matter if he went there. Sure. Ling Yu nodded in agreement after a slight ponder. Following this, the two swore an oath at the same time, before Ling Yu led the way in another direction. End of chapter. Chapter 1282. Time gradually passed. After the period it took 8 incense sticks to burn, martial monarch Ling Yu finally came to a stop and landed on the ground. It's deep inside the lake. Ling Yu withdrew his aura and said with a stern look. Qin Nan raised his head and raised his eyebrows with a glint. In front of them was a lake with a circumference of over 1,000 li. For some reason, translucent snowflakes the size of a palm were floating on the surface of the lake. It was an extraordinarily beautiful sight. However, in the depths of such a lake, there were frightening monstrous beasts sleeping one after another. There was a total of 48 of them. In addition to that, Qin Nan sharply discovered that the 48 beasts had formed a magical formation with his left eye. If anyone were to trespass into the lake, not only would the beasts be awakened, the formation would be activated too. When that happened, even a fifth-layer martial monarch would struggle to protect themselves. Wait here, I'll go take a look, Qin Nan said. His eyes emitted a blue glow as he prepared to enter the lake. Sorry to trouble Senior. Ling Yu did not reject the offer. He had chosen to cooperate with Qin Nan because of his eye technique. With such a powerful eye technique, it would not be a problem for him to break the beast-slaughtering formation at the bottom of the lake. Hold it right there. Suddenly, a loud roar could be heard coming from the distance. Qin Nan and Ling Yu frowned and turned around. 5 figures with powerful auras could be seen in the horizon. Torrential gales swept up by them as they hurried over at an astonishing speed. The 5 cultivators were named Fei Hong, Fei Ong, Shi Shuo, Shi Qian, and Shi Kuan. Their cultivations were not weak either. Among them, Fei Ong, Shi Qian, and Shi Kuan were all 5th-layer martial monarchs, while Fei Hong and Shi Shuo were 3rd-layer martial monarchs. In the blink of an eye, the 5 cultivators landed beside the lake. Senior, I don't know these 5 people, but I can swear an oath to the heavens. These 5 people must have bought the map from Old Man Taya or snatched it from someone else. Ling Yu was afraid that Qin Nan would misunderstand. He immediately transmitted his voice to explain. The 2 of you, I'll give you 3 breaths to leave this place. Otherwise, don't blame us for being impolite. To everyone's surprise, among the 5 cultivators, 2 third-layer martial monarchs, Fei Hong and Xian, stepped forward and spoke. Their voices were cold, with an imperious aura that no one could reject. Even though they couldn't see each other's expressions, faces and so on, they could feel the arrogance in their bones from these words. Senior, let's leave at once. This Fei Hong and Xian are most likely extraordinary people from the 8 ancient tribes, the 6 forbidden grounds, and the 3 great factions. Otherwise, they wouldn't be accompanied by 3 fifth-layer martial monarchs. Ling Yu was startled. He quickly transmitted his voice. Everyone knew that in the abstruse god space, the 3 great factions, the 6 great forbidden grounds, the 8 great ancient tribes, and other factions would send their experts to assist their talented martial monarchs with great potential to acquire more abstruse god pieces. This was obviously the case for Fei Hong and Xian. Why should we leave? There are treasures here. Whoever wants them will have to rely on their own capabilities. Qin Nan calmly spoke as if he did not hear Ling Yu's words. He turned around and stepped into the lake. Senior, you. Ling Yu was stunned. The reason being that he never thought Qin Nan would say such a thing. In terms of strength, their side was obviously weaker than Qin Nan's, not to mention his formidable background. Fei Hong, Xian, and the others were startled. It was obvious that they did not expect a mere first-layer martial monarch realm cultivator to ignore their presence. Idiot. Fei Hong and Xian soon collected their thoughts. Seeing Qin Nan stepping into the lake, their lips curled upward into a cold grin. They were too lazy to make a move. Everyone knew that the beast slaughtering formation was located at the bottom of the lake. Once it was activated, even a 5th-layer martial monarch would not be able to stop it. As such, they had failed to retrieve the treasure from the lake last time. They had no choice but to find 3 experts from their tribes to help them. However, the eyes of Fei Hong, Shurong, and the others soon flickered with astonishment. They could only see Qin Nan moving forward on the surface of the lake as if he were walking on flat ground. The beasts residing in the lake seemed to be unaware of his presence. I feel that I am still in deep sleep. He managed to see through the beast slaughtering formation? Impressive eye technique. No wonder he dares to enter it with a cultivation of the first-layer martial monarch realm. However, he dares to disregard our words just because he's a little capable. Fei Hong and Shurong regained their senses, and their expressions became a little gloomy. Since when had they been disregarded by a mere first-layer martial monarch realm authority with their identities and identities? If they were in the half-god region, even the 7th-layer martial monarchs or 8th-layer martial monarchs would not dare to disregard them. Instead, they would treat them with great respect. Wake up! Fei Hong and Xian's eyes flickered as a thought crossed their mind. They blurted out at the same time. This shout was like a clap of thunder in spring. It struck the surface of the lake and caused the floating snowflakes to shatter into pieces. Crap! Ling Yu's expression changed tremendously. He did not expect these people to be so vicious to do such a thing. Qin Nan, who was walking on the surface of the lake, came to a stop too. His eyes flickered coldly. Buzz! At that instant, the calm surface of the lake began to tremble. Several terrifying auras were awakened deep inside the lake. Roar! Not long after, 48 terrifying beasts were fully awakened. They opened their bloody mouths and uttered deafening roars, shattering the surface of the lake. Their bloodshot eyes glanced at Qin Nan with tremendous murderous intent. Bold human, you dare trespass on the Snow Fate Lake, die! Following a series of thunderous roars, The water of the lake began to boil as the 48 terrifying beasts executed their attacks. The invisible beast slaughtering formation was activated too. The surroundings were filled with a murderous aura. Ha ha ha, I would like to see what you're going to do today. When Fei Hong and Shi Ong saw this scene, they both burst into laughter at the same time. Their faces were filled with ridicule. This was the consequence of disrespecting them and opposing them. Now that the 48 terrifying beasts had all awakened, unless they had some powerful life-saving measures, they would surely die. End of chapter. Chapter 1283. Unstoppable Step. Qin Nan ignored the warning and advanced instead of backing away. With a flicker, his figure turned into a blinding blue glow charging at the terrifying beasts. Is that? Ling Yu, Fei Hong, Xian, and the others were stunned. Wasn't he trying to get himself killed instead of backing away? Following this, the attacks of the 48 beasts exploded, shattering the lake within a few dozen li. Countless godly glows flickered, as if a giant star had risen from the surface of the lake. Facing the attacks, Qin Nan's figure weaved through them like a gust of wind from the 9 heavens, dodging the attacks one by one. Furthermore, as he moved deeper into the lake, the attacks of the 48 beasts became chaotic too. Somehow, the beast slaughtering formation had been broken. His cultivation is at the 5th layer martial monarch realm, and his eye technique and movement are extremely powerful. Together, he was able to break the formation and weave freely among the beasts. Fei Hong and Shi Ong lived up to their reputation. Just by looking at this scene, they instantly understood the reason behind it and exclaimed in shock. Treasure fishing rod. Qin Nan suddenly let out a roar. He took out the treasure fishing rod and swung it downward. Withdraw. Qin Nan backed away, dodging the attacks. With a pull, a crystal box as tall as a person was pulled out from the bottom of the beasts. Inside the crystal box were 30 abstruse god pieces, which were emitting an ancient, mysterious glow. Is that possible? Ling Yu was dumbfounded. As a martial monarch, he had seen countless methods of retrieving treasures, but he had never seen anything as strange as this. Did he retrieve the treasures? Let's do it. Fei Hong and Xian yelled without hesitation. Even though they were extremely prideful and had underestimated Qin Nan previously, they were born with extraordinary backgrounds and had witnessed countless battles, thus they immediately understood the situation before them. If they made their move, they would be able to trap Qin Nan together with the beast. Duan Qing, watch out. Ling Yu's heart skipped a beat. This chapter is not finished, please turn the page. Then, he opened his mouth and shouted. Haha, Duan Qing, right? I have to admit, you've impressed us, but the situation is now under our control. Hand over the crystal box and the abstruse god pieces, and we'll spare your life. Fei Hong and Xian burst out laughing. They glanced down at Qin Nan and the other 2 cultivators and stepped forward. Their figures emitted streams of monarch force into the surroundings, sealing off the space above the lake. They were in control of the situation. It didn't matter what Qin Nan had up his sleeves, or if he had any other tricks up his sleeves. He was like a caged beast with no chance of escaping. Spare my life. Qin Nan, who was weaving back and forth among the beasts, wore a grin. In the eyes of the others, they would assume that he had walked into a dead end, but in his opinion, it was actually a good thing. He had yet to have a satisfying battle since he had achieved the martial monarch realm. Now, the beasts and the 5 martial monarchs with formidable backgrounds were enough for him to use half of his cultivation. Fist of the divine god of battle. Qin Nan uttered a roar without hesitation. He immediately threw out a series of terrifying fist shadows, which loomed over Fei Hong, Xian, and the others like a storm. You dare to attack? Fei Hong, Xian, and the others were in disbelief. In their opinion, under the circumstances, Qin Nan should simply surrender and hand over the loot. Could it be that this guy was unwilling to hand over the abstruse god pieces, and was willing to sacrifice his cultivation will? Since you're unwilling to hand over the abstruse god pieces, I'll grant you your wish. The eyes of Fei Hong, Xian, and the others turned cold. Terrifying lightning and flames burst out from their bodies. Netherworld's soul-burning fire. Thunder Emperor's sword. Ancient lightning saber. The 5 cultivators executed their moves simultaneously, executing several terrifying monarch arts, which turned into scorching flames, thunderous swords, etc. that descended upon Qin Nan. Each attack contained a terrifying power that could destroy the heavens and earth. However, it was all concealed by the abstruse god space. If anyone were to see it, they would immediately know that Fei Hong, Xian. These people were from the Flame Clan and the Thunder Clan of the 8 great ancient clans. Roar. Even though the 48 beasts were not very experienced in battles, they were still intelligent enough to figure out the situation. They immediately reorganized their formation and unleashed powerful attacks. Great timing, ha ha ha. Qin Nan was overjoyed instead of being infuriated. He burst out laughing as he fully unleashed the monarch will of the divine battle destruction in his body. His aura rose to a terrifying level, which stood out even among the 5 cultivators and the beasts. Qin Nan's left arm exploded into the heaven-shattering saber, which slashed at the 5 cultivators and the beasts below. The terrifying saber intent was like a dragon emerging from the ocean, uttering a roar into the heavens, shattering the monarch arts and attacks into pieces. Is that the 6th layer martial monarch realm? The eyes of Lingyu, Fei Hong, and Xian widened. They had never imagined that the person before them was still hiding his cultivation. So what if you're a 6th layer martial monarch? You won't be able to escape death today. Fei Hong and Shi came to their senses. Not only were their auras not suppressed, they became even more boundless. There was an astonishing domineering aura that was different from ordinary people. Many people with formidable backgrounds and extraordinary backgrounds would be proud and condescending, like the prodigal son of a wealthy family. However, there were also many people who, at the same time as they were arrogant, had broad horizons and tenacious willpower. It was as if you were standing on land and looking forward, while others were standing on the shoulders of giants looking into the distance. For Fei Hong and Shi to be able to have their current status, other than their birth, they naturally had their own outstanding aspects. They belonged to the latter category. Otherwise, they would not be able to achieve their current status in the 2 ancient tribes. Will of destruction, destroying everything. Qin Nan stepped forward. Streams of will of destruction burst out from his body and surged toward the crowd like dragons, shattering the monarch arts. The remaining will of destruction collided with Fei Hong, Xian, and the rest of the beasts. Bang bang bang! At that instant, a series of deafening explosions took place. A terrifying battle took place on the lake. End of chapter. Chapter 1284. In just a few breaths' time, the tide of the battle had turned. Fei Hong, Xian, and the others were knocked back by the destruction will. Meanwhile, the beasts that were in the key positions of the formation were killed one after another, causing the beasts to fall into chaos. This person's cultivation will is too overwhelming. Ordinary 6th layer martial monarchs are no match for it. Hurry up and transfer the energy in your bodies to us. Fei Hong and Xian exchanged glances with one another and yelled. They had no choice but to end the battle as soon as possible. If they continued to drag it out, they would surely lose the battle. Got it! The other 3 did not hesitate. They performed an ancient hand seal, unleashing a tremendous force of flames and 2 streams of pure lightning into Fei Hong and Xian's bodies. Bang! At that instant, Fei Hong and Xian's auras skyrocketed. Their figures were encapsulated by powerful forces of flames and lightning, which significantly surpassed the strength of ordinary fifth-layer martial monarchs. Their auras were like that of gods descending upon the mundane world. It was the secret technique of the Flame Tribe and the Lightning Tribe, which allowed them to strengthen their cultivations on their tribesmen. That being said, the secret technique was limited by their bloodline, cultivation, etc. Are they trying to use their secret technique? Qin Nan was about to make his move when the beasts below him suddenly let out roars and charged at Qin Nan crazily, as if they had discovered something. Destroy! Qin Nan raised his eyebrows as he weaved through the beast. The heaven-shattering saber in his hand emitted a peerless saber glow, shattering the beasts into pieces. They did not even have time to self-detonate before they could do so. As long as the beasts were unable to establish the beast-slaughtering formation, they would not pose much of a threat to Qin Nan. Here's my chance, progenitor of the Flame Tribe, Wrath of the Nine Suns. Fei Hong immediately made his move. Wisps of blue-golden flames gathered in the rift and formed a magnificent figure over a few hundred zhang tall. The flames that the figure was emitting were even more terrifying, as they were able to melt the rift. Roar! The fiery figure uttered a deafening roar as if it had just awakened from its slumber. It lowered its head and locked its gaze onto Qin Nan's figure, before taking a step forward and dashing toward Qin Nan with a thunderous aura. From afar, it looked like a giant volcano was crushing down onto Qin Nan. Destruction Dragon! Qin Nan showed no sign of fear. With a thought, the destruction will gathered and transformed into the illusionary figures of two ancient purple-golden battle dragons. They opened their bloody mouths and tore the fiery figure apart with brute force. Currently, the two strongest cultivation wills in Qin Nan's body were no longer as simple as before. They were now able to transform into different forms and unleash different powers at will. Haha, you've been tricked! Fei Hong burst out laughing. He was not too bothered by the attack. Beginning Tao of Lightning, Chaotic Lightning Sword. A loud roar suddenly echoed in the sky. Shurong, who had yet to make his move, grabbed with his hand and pulled out a 10-zhang-long ancient lightning sword that was gray and white in color from the rift. Lightning and fire meet, fire god strike. Fei Hong and Xian performed a hand seal once again. The fiery figure that was being torn apart by the two destruction dragons uttered a roar once again. It leapt into the air and grabbed the chaotic lightning sword before slashing at Qin Nan. At that instant, it was as if the sky above the lake had turned into a world of lightning and fire. At the top of the world was a terrifying sword intent that intertwined with fire and lightning, which poured down like a strike from the heavens. Lightning was related to fire, thus when the two forces merged, it immediately reached a whole new level. Not only was it able to set everything on fire, it was able to destroy everything too. Sword of lightning and fire? Not bad, but it's nothing much. Tao of destruction. The blue glow in Qin Nan's left eye suddenly flickered vigorously. The boundless destruction will spread once again, which turned into a pitch-black path that penetrated the world of lightning and fire. Qin Nan followed the path. His hair danced wildly as he took one step at a time to face the sword intent. Is he? Fei Hong and Xian were stunned. They had used the same move to fight against many reputable martial monarchs and the genius Emperor Wu, but they had never seen anyone trying to overcome the move in such a manner. In the blink of an eye, Qin Nan covered 100 zhang with a single step. He arrived at the end of the path in just 4 steps. The terrifying sword intent of lightning and fire descended too. It was less than 10 zhang away from Qin Nan. It would only take half a breath's time for it to devour Qin Nan completely. Wrath of the divine god of battle. Qin Nan suddenly let out a roar as the boundless will of the divine god of battle surged into the surroundings. An illusionary, magnificent, imperious human figure rose from the ground and unleashed a terrifying aura. The human figure seemed to be infuriated. The moment it appeared, it threw a punch upward. Bang! The world of lightning and fire shattered instantly. Under this terrifying fist force, the domineering lightning fire sword Chi and the powerful flaming figure could not fight back at all. They were instantly shattered into nothingness. How could a mere sword intent and the illusionary figure of the Flame Tribe's ancestor be comparable to the illusionary figure of the divine god of battle? Crap, he has mastered a second, even more terrifying cultivation will. We have to leave this place at once. Even Fei Hong and Cheyenne were startled, as their scalps turned numb. Although they were unwilling to admit it, they could not help but admit that the person before them was too terrifying. They had no chance against him. Trying to run away? Qin Nan swung the heaven-shattering saber in his hand upward. Streams of sky-desolating qi descended from the rift, causing the aura of the place to become extremely ancient, as if they had returned to the ancient era. After achieving the martial monarch realm, Qin Nan's sky-desolating saber art had finally revealed its true potential. Duan Qing, what are you trying to do? We're from two ancient tribes. If you kill us now, you're provoking the two ancient tribes. Even in the abstruse god space, our two ancient tribes will still seek revenge on you. Fei Hong and Cheyenne snapped. If their cultivation wills were destroyed, they would have to pay a great price to recover them. Cut the crap. Before they could finish, Qin Nan slashed downward with the heaven-shattering saber in his hand. At that instant, wisps of terrifying saber intents appeared out of nowhere from Fei Hong, Cheyenne, and the others, which rapidly spread from their feet and encapsulated their figures. You, Fei Hong, Cheyenne, and the others stared with their eyes open wide. They did not expect the person before them to be so daring to attack after they had threatened him. However, before they could finish their words, the blade auras that enveloped their bodies began to slaughter one another and forcibly mince their bodies into pieces. End of chapter. Chapter 1285. At that instant, the entire lake fell silent. Ha ha! Qin Nan withdrew his aura and walked toward the lake. As he approached it, he could not help but burst out laughing, as he appeared to be in high spirits. Although he had only used 50% of his strength in this battle, the blood in his body was already boiling. After the battle, an indescribable feeling of joy rose in his heart. It was very carefree. However, if Fei Hong, Cheyenne, and the others saw Qin Nan's reaction, it was hard to tell what they would think. Did he win? Lingyu was still in a daze. His cultivation was only at the third layer martial monarch realm. The terrifying battle had given him quite a shock. Most importantly, he did not expect Qin Nan to be able to win despite being in a disadvantageous position. Here are your abstruse god pieces. Qin Nan took out 9 abstruse god pieces and handed them to Lingyu without hesitation. Thank you, senior. Lingyu collected his thoughts and was overjoyed. The Snow Fate Lake was only one of the locations marked on the map. Now that he had found 9 abstruse god pieces, he would be able to find more abstruse god pieces in the next few locations. He had hit the jackpot this time. Senior, I'll be leaving first. Let's work together again in the future. Lingyu brought his fists together and said. There was no need for Qin Nan to take care of the remaining locations. Qin Nan responded and asked Lingyu to leave after chatting for a while. It's been a fruitful day. Qin Nan did not move. He sat down with his legs crossed and glanced at his summer ring. There were 28 abstruse god pieces in his summer ring. I don't have any targets for now. Why don't I spend 1 abstruse god piece and see how many abstruse god pieces the authorities have found in the abstruse god space? Qin Nan mumbled to himself as he flicked an abstruse god fragment into the scroll that old man Taya had given him. The terrifying force encapsulating the scroll instantly vanished, allowing Qin Nan to inspect it with his divine sense. Meanwhile, on top of a cloud in the half-god region of the Kanglan continent. If one simply looked around, they would definitely not be able to see anything. However, if they were equipped with extreme abilities, they would not be able to see anything. With a powerful eye technique, one would be able to see that within the white clouds, there were two terrifying ships that were several thousand feet long, completely red and blue, and faintly intertwined with a strand of faint divine light. They were currently flying at a shocking speed. These two ships had far surpassed ordinary monarch weapons. They had reached the level of half-step divine weapons and possessed unbelievable power. Damn it! Damn it! Suddenly, two furious curses could be heard coming from a luxurious palace at the center of the fiery red ship. Wisps of monarch auras burst out from the palace, startling the other experts on the ship. Their faces were filled with doubts. That Duan Qing is so daring, he even dares to kill me. Inside the palace, a young man with fiery red hair and eyes like two wisps of flames was emitting an icy murderous aura, causing the temperature of the palace to rise rapidly. We can't let him go. Investigate at once and see if we can find out his true identity. I would like to see who exactly this Duan Qing is. On the other side, a bulky young man with purple hair and wearing a beast robe said with a dark expression. His body was surrounded by dragon-shaped lightning arcs. These two were none other than the young masters of the Flame Tribe and the Lightning Tribe, who were listed on the Genius Emperor Wu ranking. They were reputable among the peak cultivators of the half-god region, and were destined to take over the two ancient tribes in the future. Similarly, they also had another identity, which was Fei Hong and Cheyenne, whom Qin Nan had killed in the abstruse god space. Alright, we'll investigate it now. One of the martial monarchs of the Flame Tribe and the Lightning Tribe nodded with an unpleasant expression before their figures disappeared with a flicker. Similarly, they were Fei Ju and Shiqian, who had been killed by Qin Nan in the abstruse god space. Young master, please calm down. Let's recover our cultivation first. After all, we're not far away from the Anti-Heaven Alliance. The other martial monarch of the Lightning Tribe said in a deep voice. Not far away from the Anti-Heaven Alliance? The fiery red-haired young man raised his eyebrows slightly. Let's recover first. The young man from the Lightning Tribe nodded. Meanwhile, in the abstruse god space at the Snow Fate Lake, Qin Nan inspected the scroll with his divine sense, and the Taya ranking appeared. Cultivator Wuji, 732 pieces. To continue, please turn the page, Abstruse God Pieces. Cultivator, 721 Abstruse God Pieces. Cultivator Longlin, 600. Even Qin Nan could not help but smack his lips when he saw the numbers. He did not expect the person ranked so high on the Taya ranking would have so many abstruse god pieces. If it were him, how long would it take him to acquire so many pieces? Suddenly, Qin Nan was startled. The reason being that the person ranked 450th on the Taya ranking with 70 abstruse god pieces was called the God of Thieves. God of Thieves? Could it be Sima Kong? That can't be right. Sima Kong has yet to achieve the martial monarch realm, thus he wouldn't be able to enter the abstruse god pieces. Could it be that someone else in the half-god region specializes in stealing too? Qin Nan could not help but have many doubts. However, he did not overthink it. There was no way Sima Kong would be able to enter the abstruse god pieces. Thus it was not surprising that there were other thieves in the half-god region. Forget it, I'll return to Taya City and see if I can buy a map. Qin Nan shook his head and withdrew the scroll. He rose from the ground and prepared to return to the place. However, at that instant a rare occurrence took place. Dong. A soft chime could be heard in his mind, as if an ancient bell was being rung. What's going on? Qin Nan was startled. The chime did not come from the abstruse god space, but his flesh. Since his physical body was in the hall, any changes would naturally be reflected back to his martial will. Then, according to the situation, he would choose to return to his physical body. I should head back and take a look. Without hesitation, Qin Nan activated the ancient key once again. A mystical glow was emitted and encapsulated his figure, causing him to vanish into thin air. It did not take long for him to return to his flesh. In less than 2 breaths' time, Qin Nan, who was sitting in the palace, slowly opened his eyes. What's going on? Qin Nan frowned when he did not notice anything unusual in the palace. He was about to unleash his left eye when another rare occurrence took place. Dong, dong, dong. A series of thunderous chimes could be heard coming from the distance, as if they were going to fill the entire 7 luminaries' sword spirit space. It was the chime of the sky bell. End of chapter. Chapter 1286. As everyone knew, there was a sky bell in the Anti-Heaven Alliance that would only ring when something serious happened. Once it was rung, the martial monarchs, elders, deacons, etc. of the Anti-Heaven Alliance would gather at once. Previously, the illusionist martial monarch and the others had rung the sky bell to gather the people and take out the 6 monarch blood scrolls to expel Qin Nan from the alliance. The sky bell is rung? Let's go and take a look. Qin Nan's eyes flickered with astonishment. With a flicker, he flew out of the hall. The dojo not far away was already crowded with people, as the elders, deacons, etc. had all arrived. In front of them stood 3 people, who were the illusionist martial monarch Rongtian, and martial monarch Minkong. However, the 3 martial monarchs' faces were slightly pale, as if they had yet to recover from some serious injuries. Greetings, hall leader Qin Nan. The elders, deacons, and disciples immediately brought their fists together when they saw Qin Nan. The illusionist martial monarch and his crew were startled, but they did not say anything. Qin Nan, over here. A clear voice rang out from the crowd. The owner of the voice was none other than Mu Mu, who had just joined the Anti-Heaven Alliance. The surrounding elders and deacons wore envious looks on their faces. They had never seen Mu Mu greet anyone before. Even when many of them took the initiative to approach her, her reaction was extremely cold. Qin Nan brought his fists together at the crowd with a smile and landed beside Mu Mu. It had been a few months since they last met. Mu Mu now had long, black hair that reached her waist. She was wearing a black immortal dress with golden threads, which perfectly accentuated her impressive figure. Together with her attractive face and her phoenix eyes, she had a unique charm that attracted many people's attention. In addition to that, Qin Nan also discovered that the aura emitting from Mu Mu's body was even more mysterious. He could vaguely sense a hint of calamity. Did she go to the wretched disaster forest and was chosen as the successor? Qin Nan pondered. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. At that instant, an unexpected change took place. 6 shocking piercing sounds could be heard coming from the distance, together with 6 magnificent monarch auras, which shook the entire dojo as if 6 huge storms had been stirred up. He saw that the 2 people in the lead were Guiwu Great Emperor and Ancient Thunder Great Emperor. Behind him was a middle-aged man dressed like a scholar, a young man in a snow-white robe, a middle-aged woman with water droplets around her, and a black-haired old man in a blood-red magic robe. Are they Emperor Yuqing, Emperor Dongku, Emperor Liuha, and Emperor Scarlet Abyss? What's going on? All 9 martial monarchs are here? The crowd was astounded seeing this. Since the Anti-Heaven Alliance had been established, they had rarely seen 9 martial monarchs together. Even the last time the sky bell was rung, only 4 martial monarchs had shown up. What on earth had happened? Even the 9 great emperors had come? So these are the remaining 4 martial monarchs? Qin Nan raised his eyebrows slightly. It was his first time meeting all the martial monarchs of the Anti-Heaven Alliance. Emperor Yuqing and Emperor Liuha are both 3rd-layer martial monarchs. Emperor Dongku has reached the 4th-layer martial monarch realm, while Emperor Scarlet Abyss is a sixth-layer martial monarch. Qin Nan scanned the 9 cultivators with his left eye and inspected their cultivation. It seems like everyone is here. As the 6 martial monarchs arrived, a calm voice could be heard coming from deep within the clouds. The Sun and Moon Sword God was expressionless as usual, wearing a long white robe as he approached the dojo from the distance. "Greetings, Senior Sun and Moon Sword God." The 9 martial monarchs, the elders, and the others shuddered and immediately bowed. "Ha ha ha, it's been a long time since we've all gathered here, yet everyone still looks the same." Before the Sun and Moon Sword God could speak, a burst of pleasant laughter could be heard coming from the other side of the clouds. A middle-aged man wearing a straw hat, a straw cape, and cloth shoes with a slight beard and disheveled hair stood in the air. He glanced at the crowd with a smile. "9 continents, you're willing to show yourself," the Sun and Moon Sword God said calmly. "You forced me to come, didn't you?" The middle-aged man rolled his eyes. "Senior 9 continents, Sword God?" In contrast to the people in the sky, the elders, deacons, and disciples were astounded, as they had never seen the 9 continents Sword God since they had joined the Anti-Heaven Alliance. "I didn't expect that he would come in person." The hearts of the 9 martial monarchs were filled with astonishment. They had only returned to the Anti-Heaven Alliance upon receiving the Sun and Moon Sword God's order. They had no idea what was going on. However, even the 2 sword gods had shown up in person. What kind of shocking event was going to take place? Such a strange aura. Qin Nan was not too shocked. However, through his left eye, he noticed a strange force being emitted from the 9 continents sword god's figure, as if he had merged with the space around him. Normally, since they were in the space of the 7 luminaries flying sword, apart from the 7 luminaries sword spirit, no one else would be able to do so. "Let's talk business first." The Sun and Moon Sword God cast a side glance at him before closing his eyes. He was unwilling to speak further. "You." The 9 continents Sword God's lips twisted seeing his reaction. He withheld the urge to beat the crap out of him, and glanced at the crowd with a stern expression. "Fellow martial monarchs, elders, deacons, and disciples, I've gathered you here today because I have something to tell you about the fate of the Anti-Heaven Alliance." The words of the 9 continents Sword God exploded in everyone's hearts like thunder. An invisible aura spread into the surroundings, as if the entire rift was being tightened. The fate of the Anti-Heaven Alliance? The hearts of the martial monarchs, elders, deacons, and disciples shuddered. Even Qin Nan was slightly intrigued by it. As everyone knows, the South Heaven Sacred Ground is currently the strongest among the 3 great factions. It's not exaggerating to say that it's the strongest faction in the Kanglan continent. That's the faction that our Anti-Heaven Alliance is opposing. Even though it seems like our Anti-Heaven Alliance is quite powerful, it's still too far away compared to the South Heaven Sacred Ground. There's no way we can threaten their position. The 9 continents Sword God said calmly. His eyes flickered as he spoke. As such, the Alliance leader has personally visited the various factions for a meeting. Currently, the Flame Tribe, the Lightning Tribe, and the Blood Tribe among the 8 ancient tribes of the Kanglan continent have officially sworn to join the Anti-Heaven Alliance. The words served as a shocking clap of thunder. End of chapter. Chapter 1287. What? The 3 ancient tribes? The 3 ancient tribes have joined us. At that instant, the eyes of the martial monarchs, elders, deacons, and disciples were filled with astonishment. Even Qin Nan was no exception. His face was filled with astonishment. Everyone knew that the history of the 8 ancient tribes in the Kanglan continent was longer than the 3 great factions and the 6 great forbidden grounds. Even though they had declined, their strength was still immeasurable. Now that the Anti-Heaven Alliance had recruited the Flame Tribe, the Lightning Tribe, and the Blood Tribe, its overall strength had skyrocketed. It could easily be considered one of the top factions in the Kanglan continent. Most importantly, for the past 15,000 years, many martial god realm experts had waged wars against the South Heaven Gate. However, they had only managed to invite other martial monarchs to join them. No one was able to convince the 8 ancient tribes and the other factions to join them. And now, the magical hair sword god had done it. Besides, tomorrow afternoon, the Alliance leader will personally present the corpses of the 5 peak martial monarchs of the South Heaven Sacred Ground, the corpses of the 23 South Heaven Supreme Emperors, and the news of the 3 ancient tribes joining us as a huge congratulatory gift to the South Heaven Sacred Ground and the South Heaven Gate. The 9 continents sword god said with a shocking tone. The martial monarchs, elders, deacons, and disciples who were still immersed in astonishment were astounded hearing this. How was this a congratulatory gift? It was clearly challenging the South Heaven Sacred Ground openly. On top of that, it was not a normal challenge, but a vicious and imperious provocation. The magical hair sword god is indeed the strongest martial god. He once barged into the South Heaven Sacred Ground on his own, and now he dares to challenge the South Heaven Sacred Ground. No one can match his courage. Qin Nan collected his thoughts as his eyes flickered with excitement. Even the blood in his body began to boil slightly. How infuriated would the South Heaven Sacred Ground and the South Heaven Gate be after receiving such a congratulatory gift? Just imagining that scene would cause one to feel incomparably interesting, incomparably stimulating, and pleasurable. If I were to complete the lightning tribulation and become a martial emperor on my own, I would be able to do so. When the time comes, I'll have the right to challenge the South Heaven Sacred Ground and the South Heaven Gate. Qin Nan slowly exhaled a mouthful of turbid air. He quietly clenched his fists, and a red glow appeared in his eyes. He clearly remembered what the South Heaven Gate had done to him. All right, that's all for today. Now, everyone, let's welcome the people of the 3 ancient tribes to the Anti-Heaven Alliance. The 9 continents sword god smiled faintly. As soon as he finished the sentence, a deafening explosion took place deep inside the space. Following it, 2 enormous ships that looked like 2 ancient dragons with faint auras broke through the air and flew toward them. This is a demigod weapon? The people from the 3 ancient clans are here? The crowd was astounded. They turned their heads around and stared at the sight before them. In just less than 2 breaths' time, the 2 enormous ships arrived at the dojo and withdrew their glow before coming to a stop. Bang! 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 At that instant, several shocking monarch auras burst out from the 2 ships, followed by blinding monarch glows that dyed the entire sky golden. There were 30 monarch auras and monarch glows, which meant that there were 30 martial monarchs, which was 3 times the number of martial monarchs of the Anti-Heaven Alliance. In addition to that, judging from the monarch auras and monarch glows, the cultivations of these martial monarchs were between the 3rd layer and 6th layer martial monarch realm. There were even 3 peak martial monarchs, which significantly surpassed the martial monarchs of the Anti-Heaven Alliance. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Following this, a series of shocking piercing sounds could be heard as several figures with magnificent auras appeared from the vessel and headed toward the dojo. That's Martial Monarch Heartflame of the Flame Tribe, ranked 2127th on the God ranking. Isn't that Martial Monarch Yuan Ling of the Lightning Tribe? He's here. Is that the Rakshasa Demon Monarch of the Blood Tribe? The ancient Lightning Martial Monarch Lioha, Martial Monarch Donku, and the rest of the authorities of the Anti-Heaven Alliance blurted out when they saw the figures approaching. Sometimes, even Martial Monarch Guewu was just a target. This chapter does not end. Please turn the page, revealing a strange light. The reason being that they had seen these authorities in the past when they were exploring various ancient ruins in the Kanglan continent. As for the remaining elders, deacons, and disciples, their hearts trembled as their minds were in a complete mess. They had long lost their ability to speak due to the great impact. This martial monarch Heartflame has a cultivation of the fifth layer martial monarch realm. There seems to be a strange flame inside his body, which shouldn't be underestimated. This martial monarch Yuan Ling is quite interesting. The aura of lightning on his body is extremely faint. Only Qin Nan immediately scanned the crowd with his left eye upon seeing them. After all, he had only seen the names of the authorities of the half-god region on the scrolls. Now that so many of them had arrived, he would not let go of the opportunity to observe them. Ha ha, who would have thought that the Anti-Heaven Alliance would set up their headquarters in a sword? No wonder the South Heaven sacred ground couldn't find it. A burst of pleasant laughter could be heard. He could only see a young man with fiery red hair and an imperious appearance. His body was emitting a powerful will of flames, and his face was filled with pride. As expected of senior magical hair sword god, I'm quite impressed by his capabilities. A young man with purple hair, a tall figure, and a beast robe with strands of dragon-shaped arcs of lightning coiled around his body took a step forward while sizing up the surroundings, and he sighed with emotion as he spoke. Is that the young master of the Flame Tribe? It's really him, the Qilin Flame Martial Monarch who is ranked 19th on the Genius Emperor Wu ranking. That's the young master of the Lightning Tribe, ranked 21st on the Genius Emperor Wu ranking, the vast Sky Thunder Martial Monarch. Martial Monarch Liuha, Martial Monarch Dongku, and the others were astounded when they saw the two cultivators. While the other party's cultivation might be beneath theirs at the moment, their potential and future accomplishments were far beyond what they could possibly hope to match up to. The young masters of the two ancient tribes? Qin Nan raised his eyebrows as he was intrigued. He immediately scanned with his left eye. Following a glimpse, he frowned slightly. The two cultivators were encapsulated by a mysterious force, preventing him from peeking through them. However, that was not the main point. Why did they give him a familiar feeling? End of chapter. Chapter 1288. While Qin Nan was immersed in his thoughts, the Qilin Flame Martial Monarch and the vast Sky Thunder Martial Monarch led the way as if they were leading the authorities. Under the crowd's gaze, they did not even glance at the people of the Anti-Heaven Alliance as they proceeded to the front of the dojo. Greetings, Senior Sun and Moon Sword God and Nine Continents Sword God. The Qilin Flame Martial Monarch and the vast Sky Thunder Martial Monarch withdrew their prideful auras and brought their fists together respectfully. Even though the rest of the people of the Anti-Heaven Alliance were not worth mentioning in their eyes, they still had to show respect to the three Sword God. Senior Sword Gods, the Blood Rune Martial Monarch of our blood tribe, has been in seclusion for quite some time. He was unable to leave the tribe and come to the Anti-Heaven Alliance. Please forgive him. A peak martial monarch of the blood tribe with white hair stepped forward and said. The Blood Rune Martial Monarch he was referring to was the current young master of the blood tribe, ranked 17th on the Genius Emperor Wu ranking. He was stronger than the Qilin Flame Martial Monarch and the vast Sky Thunder Martial Monarch. That's fine, since everyone is here. Please follow me to the Anti-Heaven Palace to discuss something important. The Nine Continents Sword God waved his hand and headed toward the Anti-Heaven Palace. The Qilin Flame Martial Monarch, the vast Sky Thunder Martial Monarch, and the others immediately followed behind. Martial Monarch Guiwu, Martial Monarch Liuha, and the others collected their thoughts and followed behind. Qin Nan, come here too. The Sun and Moon Sword God who had remained silent suddenly transmitted his voice. Sure. Qin Nan nodded and flew toward the Anti-Heaven Palace without hesitation. When he entered the anti-heaven palace, the Sun and Moon Sword God and the 9 Continents Sword God were already seated at the leading positions. On their left were the Chilan Flame Martial Monarch, the vast Sky Thunder Martial Monarch, and the rest of the authorities, while on their right were Martial Monarch Guewu and the others. Qin Nan glanced at the crowd and naturally chose to stand on the right. Qin Nan, Martial Monarch Guewu, Martial Monarch Liuha, and the others were astounded seeing him. None of them had expected that Qin Nan would be qualified to enter such a grand occasion. Was it because Qin Nan was the Vice Hall Master of the Anti-Heaven Palace? As for the Chilan Flame Emperor, the vast Sky Thunder Martial Monarch, and the rest of the authorities only cast a glimpse at Qin Nan before withdrawing their gazes, as if they were not bothered at all. They did not even care about the martial monarchs of the Anti-Heaven Alliance, let alone a mere martial ancestor. That being said, if they knew that the person before them was Qin Nan who had surpassed the rules of cultivation, they would most likely take a second glance at him. Now, let's get down to business. Since the 3 ancient tribes have joined the Anti-Heaven Alliance, the Anti-Heaven Palace can't just stick to the same old routine. We have to make some adjustments. The 9 Continents Sword God said. The Chilan Flame Martial Monarch, the vast Sky Thunder Martial Monarch, and the others remained calm, as if they had already expected this. Martial Monarch Guewu and the others were startled. Without a doubt, since the 3 ancient tribes had joined the Anti-Heaven Alliance, their status and treatment would drop significantly. The hearts of the illusionist Martial Monarch and the ancient Lightning Martial Monarch sank. Previously, being a Vice Hall Master of the Anti-Heaven Palace did not bring them any benefits, but now that the 3 ancient tribes had joined the Anti-Heaven Palace, the status of the Anti-Heaven Palace had skyrocketed. If they continued to be a Vice Hall Master, it would bring them a lot of benefits. According to our discussion with the Alliance leader and the chiefs of the 3 ancient tribes, from today onward, the 3 Vice Hall Masters of the Anti-Heaven Palace will be replaced with 10 new Vice Hall Masters. The first Vice Hall Master will be the Blood Rune Martial Monarch, the second Vice Hall Master will be the Chilan Flame Martial Monarch, the third Vice Hall Master will be the vast Sky Thunder Martial Monarch, and the fourth Vice Hall Master will be the Martial Monarch Guewu. I believe the 4 Vice Hall Masters are fine with it. What do you think about the remaining 6 Vice Hall Masters? The 9 Continents Sword God said calmly as he glanced at the crowd. Lord Sword God, in my opinion, and also in my father's opinion, the supreme being elders of our 3 great races should all be Vice Palace Masters. The vast Sky Thunder Martial Monarch was the first to speak. The 3 supreme elders he mentioned were the peak Martial Monarch realm authorities of the Flame Tribe, Lightning Tribe, and Blood Tribe. Not a problem. The 9 Continents Sword God nodded in agreement after a slight ponder. Senior Sword God, I think the ancient Lightning Martial Monarch and the illusionist Martial Monarch should continue to be the 7th and 8th Vice Hall Masters. After all, they have been in the position for many years. To continue with the rest of the chapter, please turn the page. They have the experience. Martial Monarch Guewu blurted out upon seeing this. Senior Sword God, we agree too. Martial Monarch Liuha, Martial Monarch Donku, and the others said simultaneously. The ancient Lightning Martial Monarch and the illusionist Martial Monarch were overjoyed upon hearing this. They immediately cast grateful looks. Qin Nan's heart shuddered upon seeing this. He now understood that the meeting was basically a redistribution of the positions of the 3 ancient tribes and the people of the Anti-Heaven Alliance in the Anti-Heaven Alliance. For example, the Martial Monarchs were speaking on behalf of the ancient Lightning Martial Monarch and the illusionist Martial Monarch. It was not because of their friendship. It was because even though the 3 ancient tribes had joined the Anti-Heaven Alliance, they were still the people of the 3 ancient tribes, unlike the people who had been forced to join the Anti-Heaven Alliance on their own. In other words, the 2 sides were like 2 different factions. It was better for the people of the Anti-Heaven Alliance to let the illusionist martial monarch and the ancient lightning martial monarch continue to be the Vice Hall Masters. Senior Sword God, I disagree. Even though they used to be the Vice Hall Masters, the Anti-Heaven Alliance is no longer the same. How could a mere 4th layer and 3rd layer martial monarch be qualified to be the Vice Hall Masters? The Qilin Flame martial monarch rose to his feet and refuted, without concealing the disdain in his eyes. Senior Sword God, the Qilin Flame martial monarch is right. We can't let 4th layer and 3rd layer martial monarchs lead us to attack the Anti-Heaven Alliance, right? The vast Sky Thunder martial monarch said with a calm smile. Ha ha! The other martial monarchs of the 3 ancient tribes burst out laughing. Their laughter was filled with a hint of disdain. You! The expressions of martial monarch Guiwu, martial monarch Liuha, and the others changed rapidly. The ancient lightning martial monarch and the illusionist martial monarch's faces reddened as anger rose in their hearts. However, even anger could not change the truth. They could not refute the words of the people before them. Then, in your opinion, who should be the remaining 4 deputy palace masters? The 9 continents Sword God glanced at Qin Nan discreetly before turning to the Qilin Flame martial monarch and the vast Sky Thunder martial monarch and asked. End of chapter. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.